Chapter 1708. Just as Noah expected, because Raventail had not arrived for a long time, everyone in the venue was talking about it. In the two contestant areas of Fairy Tale, everyone had gathered together to discuss this matter. In the end, there was only one conclusion that everyone came to. It seems that something must have happened to Raventail. Elisha said thoughtfully. If the person who attacked Mira and Lisanna yesterday and took Shu and I away is Raventail, then the reason why that guild is not here is most likely that Noah has taken care of them, right? This was the conclusion that everyone came to. After all, this was the only conclusion that was consistent with the current situation. But if that's the case, Noah, who has taken care of Raventail, should be able to come back. Gray said. Now, Noah hasn't come back yet. There should be a deeper reason, right? In other words, Lucy hesitated for a while and said tentatively, the whereabouts of Noah and Raventail are unknown. It's very likely that they are together now, or even fighting. How could that be the reason? Gadjaloo curled his lips. I don't think a Raventail would be able to hold that guy back for so long. Hearing Gadjaloo's words, everyone looked at each other and nodded in agreement. Obviously, no one believed that the power of the Raventail was enough to keep Noah out for the entire night. There must be a deeper reason for this. It's really troublesome. Nazi held his head and looked unhappy. If you want to have a showdown, why don't you just come and find trouble with us in a fair and square manner? Why do they have to make things so troublesome? It's because there's no chance of winning in a head-on confrontation that those people would do such a thing. Lucy warned. Nazi, don't mess around anymore. The president is already making arrangements. We just need to focus on our game. Lucy is right. Elisha nodded and looked around at everyone. In any case, it's better that Ivan's guild is not here. This way, we don't have to worry about what they will do in secret. However, as soon as this sentence fell, another voice sounded. It's a pity that Ivan's guild is not here. For us, it's not just a good thing. With that said, Makarov, dressed in a suit, walked out of the corridor in front of everyone. There's a piece of news that I don't know if it's good or bad, Makarov said with a serious expression. Because Raventail didn't show up, and no one was found at the hotel they were staying at, the organizers have decided to disqualify Raventail from the competition. Everyone immediately burst into laughter. Only Wendy tilted her head and asked in confusion. But, why don't we know if this news is good or bad? Because, after disqualifying Raventail, the number of teams participating in the competition will be reduced to 7. This way, putting aside the competition part, there will be no way to pair up for the duel part. Makarov sighed. So the organizers have decided to let us combine Team A and Team B, and choose a new team to participate in the competition. This news made everyone frown. Combine the teams. That was not a good thing for Fairy Tale, who had the upper hand. After all, originally, if two teams participated in the competition together, the chances of winning would increase. Now that they were combined, Fairy Tale's advantage was gone. However, currently, Team A and Team B were in first and second place respectively. This was an advantage that could not be ignored. After the combination, how will the points be calculated? Laxas looked at Makarov, crossed his arms, and asked calmly. Although the two teams are in first and second place respectively, the points won't be the same, right? This has already been decided, Makarov said helplessly. After the combination, we will use the results of the team with the lower score. At this moment, everyone frowned. One must know that Team B had 44 points, while Team A only had 37 points. There was a difference of 7 points. Sabretooth, who was in third place, scored 34 points. If they were to use the results of the team with a lower score, then the gap between Fairy Tale and Sabretooth would be much smaller. It would be very easy for them to surpass each other. Isn't this unfair to us? Zhu Bian said angrily. Even if we combine our teams, we should use the results of the team with the higher score. That's right. Kana also nodded. 2 of our guild's teams have passed the qualifiers and obtained the qualifications to participate in the official competition. Now, they're merging our teams without permission. Not only are they destroying our advantage, but they're also trying to make it even smaller. Are the organizers deliberately suppressing us to make the competition more exciting and suspenseful? Maybe that's part of the reason. Makarov raised his head and looked at everyone present. But the bigger reason should be that the organizers are suspicious of us, right? Suspicious. Everyone was stunned. Only Elusha understood what Makarov meant. I see. Elusha narrowed her eyes. Because Noah wasn't present, the organizers are suspecting that our guild let Noah attack Raventail to eliminate the competition. Is that against the rules? That's right. Makarov stroked his beard. But that's just suspicion at best. So, the organizers didn't disqualify us from the competition. Instead, they let us combine and use the results of the team with a lower score. They are probably trying to cover up this matter. Cover up? Lucy couldn't help but interject. That can't be considered a suspicion, but it's basically confirmed that Noah did something to the Raventail. It can't be helped. Our guild has too many connections with Ivan's guild. Moreover, before the Great Magic Combat Arts competition started, Noah and Ivan had an argument on the street. They have enough reason to think that we did it. Makarov spread his hands. Besides, do you really think that Ivan's guild not being present has nothing to do with Noah? Everyone immediately shut their mouths. So the organizers are already giving us face by not disqualifying us from the competition. Makarov raised a finger. Now let's regroup the team. So after some discussion, Lucy, Wendy, Kana, Julian, and Mira withdrew from the competition. A new team was formed by Elusha, Naz, Gray, Gadjaloo, and Laxas. Originally, in terms of combat power, Mira should also be selected, but Mira was still worried about Lisanna in the hotel, so she took the initiative to give up her position and return to the hotel to take care of Lisanna. After regrouping the team, today's competition could finally begin. And the person who appeared in the competition was Elusha. Elusha, who walked into the venue, suddenly felt a very strong gaze. She raised her head and looked over. She saw that in front of her, Maniba was staring at Elusha, revealing an unpleasant smile, and said so. Without that monster, can the sprite still defeat the tiger? Hearing this, Elusha's eyes flashed, and a strong smile full of determination appeared on her face. It's a pity that our guild is filled with monsters, Shurfong said, shaking his head. Maniba's eyes narrowed, and her smile became cold. Chapter 1709. The competition had officially begun. However, as soon as Chabati announced the start of the competition from the rostrum, all the spectators fell silent. They looked at each other with a confused look on their faces. Not only the spectators, but even the magic shooters from the major guilds looked at the battle in the center of the field in amazement. They were somewhat unable to react. Taking a closer look, a huge water ball with a diameter of more than 100 meters was suspended in the air. In the huge water ball, there were two girls in swimsuits. One was wearing a bold red bikini, showing off her perfect figure, but she was looking at Elusha with a dignified face. The other one was wearing a conservative swimsuit like a training suit. She was floating in the water with a victorious smile on her face. Aside from Elusha and Maniba, the other contestants from the other guilds were lying on the ground outside the giant water sphere. They were also wearing swimsuits, and their bodies were soaking wet. They all had blank looks on their faces. Looking at this strange situation on the platform, Chapati was extremely surprised and puzzled. At the beginning of the competition, except for contestant Elusha from Fairy Tale and contestant Maniba from Sabertooth, all the other contestants fell out of the field and were directly eliminated. What the hell is going on? Chapati's report made all the spectators talk about it. Only Elusha, who was in the water ball, still looked at Maniba with a dignified face and said in a deep voice, "What did you do?" The fourth day of the Great Magic Battle Arts exhibition was a naval battle. As the name implied, although the battle was not in the sea, the contestants were required to enter the water ball in the center of the venue to fight and find ways to stay in the water ball. Once they were hit by the huge water ball, they were considered to be eliminated. The first person to come out of the water ball was the last person. The second person to be hit out was the second to last person. And so on, until the third person was born, when there were only two people left in the water ball. From then on, the special rules were used. The so-called special rule referred to the 5-minute rule. When there were only two people left in the water ball, a 5-minute countdown would begin. Within the next 5 minutes, if one of the remaining two people was hit by a water ball, that person would fall to the last place. If the remaining two did not get hit by the water ball after 5 minutes, then even if one of them was hit, he would still be able to get second place. The organizers probably wanted to make the competition more interesting, so they used such a rule. However, no one expected that. As soon as the competition started, apart from Alusha and Maniba, all the other contestants from the other 4 guilds mysteriously fell out of the water ball. Everyone was puzzled by this unbelievable situation. However, Alusha could feel it clearly. At the start of the match, a very special magic emerged from Maniba's body. Therefore, there was no doubt that all of this was Maniba's doing. In other words, in just a moment, Maniba used a method that even Alusha was not aware of to eliminate the rest of the contestants, and only Alusha remained. To this, Maniba just laughed. This is my magic, a magic that manipulates space. A magic that manipulates space? Alusha was slightly startled, but she immediately understood. Don't tell me, you can use magic to manipulate space and teleport as you wish? That's it. Maniba raised one hand, and then on that hand, a wave of space began to vibrate, condensing into a ball of light. It's not just me. As long as it's within my sight, I can use this magic to move everything I want. Once the competition starts, I'll throw out all those fellows who are in my way. How about that? Very good magic, right? Hearing Maniba's words, the surrounding audience suddenly understood. However, not only did Alusha not feel relieved, her pretty face became more and more tense, and her gaze towards Maniba became extremely sharp. If that's the case, why don't you teleport me out as well? That way you'll win, right? Not just win. As long as Maniba teleported Alusha out now, then under the rule of 5 minutes, Alusha would directly fall to the last place. For Sabertooth, who had been hostile to Fairy Tail, wasn't this the situation that they wanted to see the most? However, Maniba teleported the rest of the contestants out, but left Alusha alone, and didn't teleport her out, letting the 5 minutes continue to pass. Could it be that Maniba wanted to humiliate Alusha by teleporting her out at the last moment of the 5 minutes? Directly teleporting you out and making you the last place, that's not bad. Maniba smiled rather coldly. Unfortunately, that'd be too boring. Boring. Alusha's pair of eyes began to gradually condense. Is it because of this reason that you deliberately let me stay? That's right. Maniba admitted frankly, but the words that came out of her mouth made people's hearts turn cold. Isn't your fairy tale very powerful? Isn't there an existence that humans can't compare to? But you can't be thinking of taking the title of the strongest from us by yourself, right? Then let me see what kind of ability you have. Our Sabertooth is the strongest. Maniba looked at Alusha with extremely cold eyes. Want to take away our title of the strongest? Just a little fairy, don't be too complacent. The audience suddenly became silent. Alusha just stared at Maniba. After a long while, she relaxed her body, and her eyes became sharp. You didn't teleport me out of the arena at the first moment, but you still openly explained the effect of your magic to me. Who is the one who is complacent? I'll prove it to you. As soon as her voice fell, clank, Alusha's body suddenly bloomed with dazzling light. Seeing this scene, Maniba's smile became vicious. She raised one hand, and a wave of magic light gathered in her hand, emitting bursts of spatial fluctuations. At this moment, Alusha, whose whole body bloomed with dazzling light, moved. Accompanied by a faint sound of breaking through the air, Alusha's figure disappeared in place, turning into a dazzling light shadow. With an extremely terrifying speed, she drew a perfect arc in the water and violently shot toward Maniba's direction. Maniba, who was preparing to slowly torture Alusha to vent her anger, was shocked. However, before Maniba could react, the light shadow rushed to her back and fiercely hit Maniba's body. Bang! Even in the water, a muffled sound could be clearly heard. Maniba, who suffered a heavy blow, directly spat out the air in her mouth, and her whole body flew backward. After a while, she reacted, trying to stabilize her body, and suddenly raised her head and looked forward. There, Alusha's figure slowly appeared from the dazzling light. However, Alusha's red bikini swimsuit had disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by an animal costume. It was a costume that looked like a cat and a leopard, with animal ears on the head. Wearing this animal costume, Alusha held 2 knight swords in her hands, and a pair of eyes suddenly opened. Then, under Maniba's gaze, she turned into a phantom, like an arrow leaving the bow, and once again violently shot out. That speed was just like a torpedo in the water, leaving only a faint trace, and stirring up a surge of water. Maniba turned pale with fright, and directly swept over her body. Poochie! In the tearing sound, a sword light cut through Maniba's side abdomen, and Maniba let out a scream. Chapter 17:10. W8. What? In the contestant area of Sabertooth, Sting, Logue, Lucifer, and Alyaga watched as Maniba's side was slashed by the sword light in the water ball. They all turned pale with fright as Maniba let out a cry of pain. On the contrary, when the audience saw the sudden change in the situation, they all began to cheer. Under such circumstances, in the water ball, Elusha, who was dressed like a wild animal, directly turned into a flash of light. Like lightning, she repeatedly dashed through the water at a speed that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. It was as if she came from all directions, and the sword light slashed Maniba's body one after another. Poochie poochie poochie. A series of tearing sounds resounded. Ah! Maniba's scream resounded. After being slashed repeatedly by Elusha, who had turned into a flash of light, Maniba felt a sharp pain all over her body. This girl with a somewhat twisted personality, whose face was covered with heavy makeup, began to show a trace of pain. The sharp pain from all over her body finally made Maniba react. She tightly bit her lips, and her face twisted. Damn it! After angrily shouting, Maniba fiercely spread out her hands, and a wave of magic light fluctuated in her hands. Suddenly, one wave of magic light after another appeared around Elusha, who had turned into a flash of light. Moreover, the magic inside began to riot. In the next moment, the magic light waves exploded one after another. Bang 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 bang. Accompanied by a series of explosions, the magic light waves turned into the most direct impact. Like bombs, they exploded one after another, setting off waves of turbulence in the water. Not only could Maniba's magic be used to control space, but she could also change the properties of the space that her magic was used on. For example, if he added the fire attribute like just now, the space controlled by Maniba would directly turn into heat and explode like a bomb. The destructive power and lethality would be very strong. However, in the face of those continuous explosions, Elusha was like a flash of lightning. She was extremely fast, constantly dodging the exploding space. She was flashing in the turbulence and wasn't affected at all. So fast. Maniba's expression changed. At this moment, Elusha swept through space again. The night sword in her hand suddenly flashed, and the sword light once again slashed through Maniba's body. Poochie! With another tearing sound, Maniba's shoulder was fiercely slashed. The sharp pain assaulted her mind, causing Maniba to scream out in pain. For a moment, Maniba was completely unable to do anything to Elusha. She endured the slashes from all directions, and continuously let out miserable cries. How is this possible? In the contestant area of Sabertooth, Sting tightly grasped the railing, his eyes full of disbelief. Milady can't even fight back against that Elusha Shukalito. No, the problem lies with Elusha Shukalito's armor. Lucius' expression became serious. Elusha Shukalito uses magic to change equipment. She can change equipment at will. Right now, the armor she's wearing is called flying armor. It can increase the user's speed by several levels. So Milady's magic can't catch up with that woman. Alyaga was also shocked. Is that Elusha Shukalito really that strong? Elusha Shukalito is indeed very strong, but in my memory, she's not strong enough to make Milady unable to fight back. Lucius stared at the huge water ball in midair and said in a deep voice. There must be some other reason. Rog also stared at the water ball that was constantly transforming into flashes of light that swept past Maniba's body. After a while, Elusha suddenly widened her eyes as she slashed at Maniba's body one after another, causing sword lights to shoot out from all directions and slash at Maniba's body. After a long while, she suddenly opened her eyes wide. Elusha Shukalito's weapon isn't an ordinary weapon. Hearing Roger's voice, everyone was shocked. It wasn't until this moment that they realized with difficulty. In Elusha's hand, which was constantly sweeping through space like a flash of light, one of the two night swords looked like a fish's fin. It was dark green all over. That's, Lucius said in shock. In my memory, that seems to be a weapon that goes with Sea Emperor's armor. As soon as this was said, everyone immediately understood. Elusha didn't just use the flying armor that could provide super high speed. She also used the Sea Emperor's armor that had a great resistance to water. That water attribute magic weapon completely cut through the resistance and pressure of water, allowing Alusha to walk as if she was walking on flat ground and could increase her speed by several levels. On the contrary, Maniba was hindered by the resistance of water and her movements were somewhat sluggish. With one increasing and one decreasing, Maniba simply couldn't adapt to Alusha's super high speed and could only passively endure the attacks. Poochie! The sword light was like lightning. With the support of the flying armor, it quickly slashed through Maniba's body, causing Maniba to be heavily injured and covered in cuts and bruises. In the midst of the screams, Maniba heard Alusha's indifferent voice. If you had used your magic to teleport me out from the beginning, then I definitely wouldn't have been able to beat you in this battle. Unfortunately, you were too confident in your own strength and your own advantages. Now your magic can't catch up with me at all, and in the water, you can't be unaffected like me. This is the result. Your arrogance led to your defeat, Maniba. While speaking, Alusha, who had turned into a flash of light, suddenly flashed behind Maniba. Her body spun, and one of her legs was like a whip, violently lashing out. Along with a surge of water, it heavily whipped Maniba's side waist. Bang! In the midst of the muffled sound, Maniba screamed again. Her whole body was sent flying by the powerful leg whip. In the end, Maniba flew out of the water ball and fell heavily on the ground, spitting out a mouthful of blood. The battle is over. Chapati immediately raised the microphone and announced loudly. On the fourth day of the Great Demon Martial Arts Competition, the reorganized team, Fairy Tale, won first place in the sea battle. In the water ball, Alusha, who was wearing the flying armor, raised the Sea Emperor's sword high in the air, causing the entire audience to burst into enthusiastic cheers, welcoming the victory. Compared to the loud cheers from the audience, the contestant area of Sabertooth was silent. Impossible! Sting murmured, as if he had lost his soul. Miss, actually lost. Rog, Lucius, and Alyaga were also silent. It was no wonder that their performance was so unbearable. First of all, they had already determined that Fairy Tale, without Noah, was no match for Sabertooth. Now, after being slapped in the face by Alusha, these people were already dumbfounded. Secondly, Maniba, who could control space magic, was the strongest sorcerer in Sabertooth. Even Sting and Rog of the Twin Dragons were no match for her. How could Sting and the others believe their eyes that Maniba was so easily defeated by Fairy Tale? Maniba, who was lying on the ground, looked at the sky in disbelief and murmured, "I lost." These words were buried in the rising and falling cheers of the crowd. And the cheers were simply the biggest mockery for Maniba, who was defeated by Alusha because of her carelessness. At that moment, Maniba raised her head and looked at Alusha, who was holding her weapon high in the water ball and enjoying the cheers of the audience. In her eyes, there was unimaginable rage and viciousness. Alusha! Shukalito! Chapter 17:11. Without a doubt, after this round, Alusha was thoroughly hated by Maniba. However, no matter how much Maniba hated Alusha, this twisted and self-belittling girl still couldn't change the fact that she was defeated by Alusha because of her arrogance. Therefore, in this battle, Alusha successfully helped Fairy Tale obtain a valuable 10 points. Although Maniba lost because of her arrogance, she still managed to last past the 5-minute time limit. So Sabertooth didn't fall to the last place and obtained the second place of this battle, obtaining 8 points. Even though he had gotten second place, Sabertooth's self-esteem had once again been torn to shreds. Originally, Sabertooth thought that if Noah wasn't here, no one would be able to threaten their victory. Because of this battle, Sabertooth's spirit was once again severely damaged. Perhaps they really couldn't learn their lesson. Even at this stage, Maniba and her party still didn't think that a single fairy tale could really suppress a Sabertooth. Therefore, they decided to get back at the Sabertooth part of the duel. Unfortunately, in the end, this group of people was once again severely defeated. Due to the combination of Fairy Tale and Raven Tale's absence, the duel section was divided into 3 rounds. Different from the previous 3 days, the 4th day's duel section was a group duel. 2 people from each group would be selected to fight in pairs. After the 3 group duels, the results were as follows. The first duel was between the Blue Pegasus and the Cotter Cerberus. The result was that the Blue Pegasus won and obtained 10 points. The second duel was between Lamia Scale and Mermaid Heel. The result was a tie, with both sides winning 5 points. The third duel was a perfect example of what it meant to be enemies on a narrow road. Fairy Tail vs. Sabertooth. Players: Naz, Gadjaloo vs. Sting, Logue. In other words, it was a duel between 4 Dragon Slayer archmages. As far as the process was concerned, this duel was quite interesting. Not to mention anything else, Sting and Logue were indeed not weak. 2 of the 5 most powerful magic shooters in the previous Great Demon Combat Arts exhibition matches, Justin and Logue, were at least much more powerful than Naz and Gadjaloo during the S-rank magic shooter advancement exam. However, after 3 months of cultivation, Naz and Gadjaloo could really be said to be reborn. Their strength had increased to the point that even their companions in the guild were surprised. Therefore, Naz and Gadjaloo almost completely defeated Sting and Logue. They won the battle without any injuries, and won another 10 points. In the end, the whole day, the rankings almost didn't change, but the gap between the team scores was widened. First place, Fairy Tail, 57p. Second place, Sabertooth, 42p. Third place, Mermaid Heel, 39p. Fourth place, Lamia Scale, 36p. Fifth place, Blue Pegasus, 29p. Sixth place, Cotter Cerberus, 14p. At this point, the 4th day of the Great Demon Combat Arts competition ended. On the other hand, Fairy Tail completely defeated Sabertooth on this day, pulling the gap between them to 15 points. Without the monsters, could the fairy still defeat the tiger? There was no need to answer Magneba's question. Thus on this day, the pride of the entire Sabertooth magic shooters was torn to shreds, which gave Lucius and Alyaga a new idea. Perhaps this time, the title of the strongest guild in the Fiori Kingdom was really not fated with Sabertooth. After all, the great demonic battle show had entered the real late stage. The end of the 4th day meant that the 5th day was coming. At this time tomorrow, the outcome would be revealed. However, facing Fairy Tail, would Sabertooth really be able to win tomorrow? No one knew about this. There was only one thing that could be confirmed. That was, as the great demonic battle show went on, an unknown plan was also going on. Night, who knew how many times it had fallen? In the palace, in Emerald's room, the princess of the Fiori Kingdom was standing by the window like before, looking at the night sky outside, her delicate face full of worry. At this time, the door was pushed open, and Alcardios walked into the room. Looking at Emerald, who was standing by the window, he was silent for a while, then suddenly opened his mouth. The 4th day of the Great Demonic Battle Show has ended. After tomorrow, the results will be out. Yes. Emerald's small hands slowly clenched as she whispered. At that time, whether or not the solar eclipse plan will be carried out will depend on the results of the Great Demonic Battle Show. Whether or not it is carried out, we must be prepared. Alcardios said. The magic collection is basically complete. Now we only need the power of the Star Elf Archmages. To be more precise, it should be the power of the keys of the 12 Zodiac Gates. Emerald turned around and looked at Alcardios. Sir Alcardios, how are the 2 Star Elf Archmages in the guild now? Hearing this, Arcadio's expression turned solemn and serious. I was just about to report this matter to the princess. What? Emerald suddenly became nervous. Could it be that there is a problem? Yes. Alcardios said with a serious expression. Of the 2 Star Elf Archmages in the guild, one of them suddenly disappeared, and even the one who is beyond the human range also disappeared. What? Emerald was slightly surprised and quickly asked. Why is it like this? The reason is still under investigation. Alcardios hesitated for a moment and then said. However, I found that the lock on the Eclipse Gate seems to have been unlocked a little. The lock on the Eclipse Gate was unlocked. Emerald was more and more surprised. But to unlock the Eclipse Gate, one must use the keys of the 12 Zodiac Gates. Yes. Alcardios looked at Emerald and said. So someone must have used part of the keys of the 12 Zodiac Gates to unlock the Eclipse Gate. Feitsue's complexion suddenly became somewhat uncertain. After a while, Emerald raised her head and looked at Alcardios. Let's go. Let's go to the Eclipse Gate. At the same time, in the Dragon Graveyard, Noah and Xuanai were still hugging each other with their eyes closed as if they were resting. At a certain moment, Noah's ears moved slightly, He opened his eyes and looked forward. There, a person in a black robe slowly walked over and stopped in front of Noah. Xuanai seemed to have noticed the footsteps and quickly opened her eyes. Under the gaze of Noah and Xuanai, the black-robed person reached out and lifted the hood of the cloak. Looking at the appearance that appeared under the hood, Noah and Xuanai were shocked almost at the same time. Lucy. It was Lucy. However, the other party lowered her head and spoke with a trace of vicissitudes of life on her face. I am not the Lucy of this era. Not the Lucy of this era? Noah and Xuanai were both startled. Under such circumstances, the other party looked straight at Noah and said this. I am from the future. Chapter 17:12. This was a very vast space. Moreover, it was located in the palace of Coloches. At first glance, this vast space looked like a hall. However, the size of this hall was not only comparable to an ordinary palace, but it also had an indescribable sense of solemnity. Even if it was said to be the palace of the king, there would definitely be people who would believe it. Unfortunately, this vast and solemn hall was completely empty. There was nothing in it at all. No, it should be said that apart from one thing, there was nothing else in this vast hall. That thing was a door. A very grand and tall door. Its height alone reached more than 10 meters. It was engraved with the sun, moon, and stars, as if it was written with the truth of heaven and earth. Located in this hole, under the contrast of this very mysterious door, the solemn atmosphere in the air was particularly strong. Obviously, this was a place that not just anyone could enter. It was filled with an incredible sense of silence. At a certain moment, a series of footsteps began to sound. Emerald and Alcardios entered this vast hall together, came to the front of the magnificent door, and went straight to a device next to the door, then stopped in front of the device. Emerald looked at the device with a very serious gaze. The more she looked, the more serious Emerald's expression became. In the end, Emerald came to a conclusion. Yes, the lock was indeed opened a little. Without a doubt, someone must have used the key of the 12 zodiac gates to do this. And the person who can do this, besides me and the princess, is probably only that person. Alcardios continued Emerald's words. The person who suggested to the princess to use the solar eclipse plan to save the future. The person from the future. This was not a joke, nor was it an exaggeration. At least, Emerald and Alcardios knew that the so-called person from the future was completely valid. As long as he borrowed the power of the door in front of him, he could do this. Once opened, he can enter the torrent of time and freely travel back to the past the solar eclipse. Alcardios looked at the magnificent door in front of him and said as if talking to himself. Through this door, from the future to this era, no one knows better than him how to open the lock of the door. Faitsue heavily nodded her head and fell into her own memories. When did that person from the future come to this era? As for the specific time, Faitsue also didn't know. Faitsue only knew that the person from the future suddenly appeared in front of her one day and brought her a shocking news. July 7th, X791. During this period of time, there will be 10,000 dragons attacking this country. This country and this era will be destroyed. Emerald whispered. The only way to avoid this is to gather mana and open the eclipse gate. Then we can turn the massive mana into a huge cannon that can destroy 10,000 dragons. We can use this to destroy the huge dragon horde and save this country and the world. This was the reason why Emerald and Alcardios used the Great Magic Battle Show as a bait to hold an annual ceremony that would determine the ranking of the major guilds in the kingdom. They were secretly collecting the magic power of magic shooters from all over the kingdom. The eclipse gate that could allow people to freely travel back to the past. Through this gate, that person from the future came to this era and brought the news of 10,000 dragons attacking the kingdom and the world to Faitsue. For this reason, Faitsue and Alcardios spent 7 years to collect the mana needed to open the eclipse gate. This was because the people from the future had told Emerald that other than traveling to the past, the solar eclipse could also use the gathered magic power to launch a cannon. The power of the cannon was enough to destroy 10,000 giant dragons and save the country and the world. In addition to the huge amount of mana needed to open the eclipse gate, there was another condition to open it. That was to gather all the keys of the 12 zodiac gates and open the eclipse gate. This was the reason why there was a legend that once the 12 zodiac gates keys were gathered, the power was enough to change fate. As long as the 12 golden keys were gathered and the eclipse gate was opened, one could freely travel back to the past and change history and fate. That person from the future told Fate Sue that in order to change the fate of the world being destroyed by 10,000 dragons, he came from the future. Using the mana he collected for 7 years to launch the Eclipse Cannon and destroy 10,000 dragons. This was the Eclipse Gates plan. However, Fate Sue had not decided whether to carry out this plan or not. The reason was simple. Because Fate Sue did not fully believe the words of that person from the future. Logically speaking, the dragons should have perished 400 years ago. Even if there were survivors, there should not be as many as 10,000 dragons. Fate Sue looked at the tall gate. If that is the case, how could there be 10,000 dragons attacking the kingdom and the world being destroyed? Because of this, the princess has been hesitating whether to carry out the Eclipse Gates plan or not, right? Alcardios understood Fate Sue's thoughts. However, the person from the future who spoke to the princess left us a prophecy. That's right. Fate Sue's eyes flashed. That person from the future said that the Great Demonic Martial Arts Exhibition will use a very special method to obtain the result. Based on that result, under normal circumstances, it should be impossible to happen. And if such a special result happens, then it can only prove that the words of that person from the future are true. Alcardio said the plan in Fate Sue's heart. When that time comes, the princess will carry out the solar eclipse plan, open the solar eclipse gate, and be ready to fire the solar eclipse cannons to destroy the 10,000 dragons. For this reason, we must first prepare to open the eclipse gate. The mana has been collected, and the only thing left is the key to the 12 zodiac gates. Fate Sue reached out and touched the device in front of her. Now, the lock of the eclipse gate has been partially unlocked. Obviously, that person from the future used part of the key. This speculation was basically correct. After capturing Sueno, Law brought the Aries, Gemini, Scorpio, Libra, and Pisces star spirit keys here and opened part of the lock of the eclipse gate. Then, Law brought the key back to the dragon graveyard and threw it next to the unconscious Sueno. Noah picked it up and returned it to Sueno. What's going on? Alcardios frowned. Why is the key to Sueno Agulia in the hands of that person from the future? It seems that while we are preparing, that person from the future is also secretly preparing. Fate Sue whispered. Now we only need Lucy Heartfilia's key to open this lock completely, and we can open the eclipse gate at any time. So, princess, what should we do now? Alcardios asked. Previously, the princess seemed to have her own ideas, right? Now, we must borrow the power of Lucy Heartfilia. Fate Sue turned her head and looked at Alcardios. Master Alcardios, can you bring Lucy Heartfilia here and ask her to assist us? I understand. Alcardios nodded. I will personally ask Lucy Heartfilia to assist us. Only then did Fate Sue's complexion slightly relax. However, whether it was Fate Sue, Alcardios, or Law, none of them expected this. Law was not the only one who came back from the future. There was another person from the future who came to this era. In the dragon graveyard, Noah and Sueno fell into silence after listening to the news brought by Lucy, who claimed to have never been here. 10,000 dragons. Sueno's voice became a little hoarse. Is that really possible? I know, this matter will not be easily believed. The future Lucy said bitterly. But please believe me, what I said is true. The atmosphere suddenly became heavy. Chapter 17:13. Noah had 100 ways to deny the news brought by the future Lucy. Just like what Emerald said, 400 years ago, the dragon race had already been wiped out by Aconerolia. Even if some survived, there shouldn't be as many as 10,000 dragons that survived. So, this matter was outrageous no matter how he thought about it. In addition, if there really were 10,000 dragons in this world, then humans would have been slaughtered by the dragons long ago. Why did they wait until now to welcome the dragon's attack? Where did the 10,000 dragons live before this? One question after another gave Noah ample reason to doubt Lucy. However, from Lucy's bitter face and painful voice, Noah couldn't arouse the slightest doubt. Therefore, Noah believed her. If you are really Lucy, then we have no reason to doubt your words. Noah looked straight at the future Lucy and said, but if you came back to this era from the future, then I want to ask, in the future world, under the attack of 10,000 dragons, did we not resist at all? Resist? The future Lucy's tone became even more bitter. That was 10,000 dragons. How could we resist? Even if there were 10,000 dragons, couldn't we resist? Noah frowned. Did the future me not do anything? Although he didn't know the specific strength of the 10,000 attacking dragons, but 400 years ago, Aeconarolia alone was able to slaughter the entire dragon race. Even if the strength of those dragons far exceeded that of humans, it shouldn't reach the 4-digit level. Even if there were 10,000 dragons that didn't reach the 4-digit level, with Noah's strength, it shouldn't be impossible to resist, right? After all, 7 years ago in this world, Noah was already comparable to Aeconarolia. So if even Aeconarolia could single-handedly slaughter an entire dragon race, then there was no reason why Noah couldn't do it. According to this, with Noah here, even if 10,000 dragons appeared, they shouldn't be unable to resist. Listening to Lucy's words, the future seemed to only be filled with despair and fear. However, something that Noah didn't expect happened. The future you? Lucy looked at Noah with an extremely hesitant gaze. After a while, she mustered up her courage and said such a sentence. Although I don't know what the future you did, in the future I know, you didn't appear at all. You didn't even exist in fairy tale. You? What did you say? Noah was really surprised. The future me isn't in fairy tale? Not to mention not being there, I haven't even heard of your existence. The future Lucy said with great doubt. Logically speaking, with how powerful you are, I should have at least heard of you. However, as far as I can remember, the president has never adopted a child, much less a grandson by the name of Noah Dole. Thus, when I returned to this era and saw you, I was also very surprised. The doubt and surprise in the future Lucy's tone was indeed very strong. Moreover, the way the future Lucy looked at Noah was completely like looking at a stranger. She didn't have the kind of intimacy and familiarity that the Lucy in fairy tale looked at Noah. These phenomena all proved a problem. That is, in the era of the future Lucy, there was indeed no such person as Noah in fairy tale. What's more, in that era, whether or not Noah existed was a problem. Regarding this fact, Noah was silent. Although there were more or less complicated feelings in his heart, Noah still understood what was going on. Originally, Noah was not a person of this world, but a transcendent existence born from the fragments of the starting worlds of thousands of worlds in between worlds. The reason why he came to this world was that the worlds that birthed Noah wanted to give Noah a good environment to grow up in, so they sent Noah here. In other words, for this world, Noah shouldn't exist. As a result, because of the world's blessing, Noah came to this world and quietly made some changes in this world. There was no such thing as Noah in the future Lucy's era, probably because the development of that era was the original trajectory of this world. And the era where Noah is now, because of the existence of Noah, has undergone some changes and became independent from the original trajectory of the era. Future Lucy tried to go back to the past through the space-time door called solar eclipse to change her fate, and she happened to come to the era where Noah existed. In other words, the era of Noah and the future Lucy were two different developments in the same world, which was similar to the theory of parallel worlds. It had to be said that this was a very regrettable matter. If Noah existed in the era of the future Lucy, then with Noah's ability, which was too high for this world, he might be able to save everyone and not let the future Lucy's era go to destruction. Looking at the pain and sadness of the future Lucy when she mentioned the future, Noah had enough reason to believe. In the future Lucy's era, everyone in fairy tale died. I have a question. Noah looked at the future Lucy and said, "Do you know what Project Solar Eclipse is?" Project Solar Eclipse? The future Lucy was slightly startled and immediately shook her head. Sorry, I haven't heard of it. Then the second question. Noah's eyes slowly condensed. Besides you, is there a second person who came back to this era from the future? A second person from the future. The future Lucy froze and answered almost reflexively. I don't know, but in my era, I was the only one who came to this era through the solar eclipse. Hearing the future Lucy's words, some of the doubts in Noah's heart gradually solved. There is no doubt that this Lucy came back from the future with only one purpose. That is to tell the future of this country and even the world to the people of this era and to save the tragedy of this era. However, Lucy was not the only one who came from the future to this era. The guy who called himself Law once said that if there was no Noah in this year's Great Demonic Combat Arts competition, then the result would be doomed. In other words, Law knew very well what the future of this era would be without the existence of Noah. In this way, there was only one thing that could be proven. Law was also a person from the future. Moreover, Law also arranged a plan with the solar eclipse as the center in an attempt to do something. Was it because Law clearly knew that 10,000 dragons were about to attack this world, and this world was heading toward destruction, so he wanted to change that fate? Or did he have other plans? Noah felt that he was getting closer to the truth. At this moment, Xuan'ai suddenly hesitated and said so. Sir Noah, I think from the future, there is more than one person who came to this era. The future Lucy was startled. Noah was also slightly startled and looked at Xuan'ai. Under Noah's gaze, Xuan'ai pursed her lips and said in a low voice, I know the true identity of the person who called himself Law. With that said, Xuan'ai told Noah a name. Hearing that name, Noah's eyes flashed and fell into silence again. I'm sorry, although I came to this era from the future, I didn't bring any plan to save this era. The future Lucy suppressed the emotions in her heart and said to Noah emotionally. But, you are so powerful. You must have a way to save this era. I beg you, save this era, save my companions, save our future. Hearing this, Noah smiled. You don't need to say that, I will do that. Chapter 17:14. In the future, when Lucy found Noah and told him what would happen in the future, Noah gradually began to realize the hidden undercurrents of this year's great demonic combat arts exhibition game. Many things were happening outside. First, in order to prepare to open the Eclipse Gate at any time, Alcardios went to the Inn of Fairy Tale, hoping to talk to Lucy. Of course, in the inn, Elusha, Wendy, Naz, and Gray, who were originally in the same group as Lucy, were also present. After some negotiations, the group agreed to discuss with Alcardios, and under Alcardios' lead, they arrived at the location of the Eclipse Gate. There, Alcardios told Elusha and the others a part of the Eclipse plan, and hoped to get Lucy's help. However, before Lucy could reply, someone barged in and directly arrested Alcardios, Elusha, and the others. It was the Minister of National Defense of the Fiori Kingdom, Dardan. This Minister of National Defense did not know the true content of the Eclipse plan, but he knew that Alcardios was preparing to open the Eclipse Gate that could travel through time and space. Under such circumstances, Dardan thought that Alcardios was preparing to use the Eclipse Gate to return to the past and then do something to change history, and expressed extremely strong opposition to this. Thus, without knowing the true contents of the solar eclipse plan, the Minister of Defense barged in with his soldiers in order to protect the current history. He directly captured Alcardios and imprisoned the Star Elven Archmage who could open the solar eclipse gate, which was Lucy, as an accomplice. As for Elusha, Wendy, Naz, Gray, and the others, they were all chased out of the palace and sent back to the inn. When the High Mages of Fairy Tale found out about this matter, they were all furious. If it was just to arrest Alcardios, it would have been fine. However, in order to prevent the solar eclipse from taking place, Dutton treated Lucy as an accomplice and imprisoned her. This undoubtedly violated the fairy tale's taboo. Therefore, before dawn, Makarov made arrangements for Naz, Wendy, Mira, Hubby, Xiaolulu, and Lili to form a team. When the finals of the Great Demon Combat Arts competition began tomorrow, they would sneak into the palace and rescue Lucy. In addition, Elusha, Gray, Gadjaloo, Julian, and Laxus were in charge of attending tomorrow's finals, attracting the kingdom's attention to the Great Demon Combat Arts competition so that Naz and the others could take advantage of the situation and rescue Lucy. As for the others, they continued to search for Noah and Xuan'ai. Fairy Tale, who had prepared everything properly, did not notice anything. On the top of a building opposite the Fairy Tale Hotel, Law quietly watched the development of all this, and an evil smile gradually appeared on his face. Although a lot of accidents have happened, now, history has begun to go on the right track. If it continues to develop like this, the result of tomorrow's Great Demon Combat Arts competition will definitely be the same as the history I know. As a person from the future, Law clearly knows what the result of tomorrow's Great Demon Combat Arts competition will be. In order to let Emerald trust him and open the Gate of Eclipse, Law told Emerald the result. If that result appears, it can prove that the future Law said is true, and Emerald will open the Gate of Eclipse. However, Law did not expect that in this era, there would be a person who has no intersection with the history he knows. Noah Dole. Law's expression became uncertain. That guy, who the hell is he? Not only does he not exist in the history that Law is familiar with, but he also has that kind of power beyond the scope of human beings, so Law really has a deep fear of Noah. If this variable that does not exist in history is allowed to continue to be active in the Great Demon Combat Arts competition, Then, in the end, the prophecy that Law told Emerald will definitely collapse because of the intervention of Noah, a person who does not exist. At that time, Emerald will no longer help Law open the Gate of Eclipse. If the Gate of Eclipse cannot be opened, then Law's coming to this era will become meaningless. Therefore, Law did not hesitate to take away Nai at the risk of angering Noah at any time to restrict Noah and guide history back to the track he is familiar with. And Law's efforts were not in vain after all. Although a lot of things have happened that deviated from the history I know, now, history is finally back on the right track, and my prophecy will definitely be fulfilled. Let Emerald believe my words and open the Gate of Eclipse. Law raised the corner of his mouth. At that time, even if you, Noah Dole, are beyond common sense and stronger than all humans, it will be useless. After leaving this sentence, Law directly turned into a black shadow and disappeared quietly as if blending into the moonlit night. On the other side in the palace, Emerald, who learned that Alcardios was taken down, hurriedly went to Dutton and told him the real content of the eclipse plan. What? In Emerald's room, a short old man was shocked. 10,000 dragon generals are attacking the kingdom? How can that kind of thing happen? I know you won't believe it. In fact, I don't believe it either. Emerald closed her eyes. That's why I decided to only prepare to open the Gate of Eclipse until the end of the Great Demon Combat Arts competition. Whether to carry out the Eclipse plan and open the Gate of Eclipse will have to wait for the results of the Great Demon Combat Arts competition. You intend to entrust the future of the kingdom to the results of a festival? Dutton said with a somewhat ugly expression. Princess, isn't that a bit inappropriate? Apart from this, is there anything else we can do? Emerald smiled helplessly. As long as there is a 1 in 10,000 chance that this kingdom will be in danger, we must prepare for the future of this kingdom. Dutton opened his mouth, but no words came out. Whether to carry out the eclipse plan or not, let's wait for the results of the Great Demon Combat Arts competition to tell me. The helpless smile on Emerald's face turned into an expression full of determination. She stared at the gradually brightening sky outside and said, "Before the results come out, I won't believe any of this." But, is the result possible? Dutton hesitated and said, "Based on the current situation, without Noah Dole's participation, the result that the person from the future mentioned should be very difficult to appear, right? Because it's difficult to appear. Once it appears, it can prove that what the person from the future said is true." Emerald looked at Dutton and said very seriously, "So, all we can do is wait for the results to appear." I understand. Dutton said in a deep voice. If it's for the future of this kingdom, I will support Her Royal Highness. Thank you very much for your understanding, Minister. Emerald nodded and immediately, once again, looked at the gradually brightening sky outside. At this time, Emerald's mind was only thinking about the prophecy that Law told her. The sorcerers of the guild, Fairy Tale, will defeat their opponents one by one. In the end, they will face Sting of the Saber-Tooth, with wounds all over their bodies. All of them will be unharmed, and Sting will kneel down and surrender. This result, no one could have predicted. Because of this, Law's prophecy seemed to be very convincing when it came true. Everything depends on the results of the Great Demon Combat Arts competition. Emerald, who had made up her mind, didn't notice it. In the night sky outside, a figure that looked like a fairy was floating there like a ghost. Looking down, a thoughtful light flashed in her emerald gem-like eyes. It seems that something incredible has really happened. Mavis looked in the direction of the hotel where Fairy Tale was located. After a while, she smiled sweetly. There's no other way, let's go help those children. Chapter 17:15. The next day, as soon as the sun rose, the citizens of Coloccas were in high spirits. Because today was the finals of the Great Demonic Arts Tournament. After today's tournament, in the following year, the rankings of the various guilds from all over the Fiori Kingdom would be revealed. The citizens of Coloccas were very much looking forward to this. Without a doubt, this year's Great Demonic Arts Tournament was much more exciting than the previous ones. In the previous Great Demonic Arts exhibition matches, it was basically Saber-Tooth who was unparalleled. Kara and Leo, who belonged to the Lamia scale, didn't participate in the previous Great Demon Combat Arts exhibition at all. Kagura, who was a member of the Mermaid Heel, had never appeared in the Great Demon Combat Arts Tournament in the past. This way, Sabretooth naturally didn't have any strong opponents, and was almost always successful, easily winning the championship every time. Although this made Sabretooth's popularity quite high, in terms of the level of excitement of the tournament, it definitely couldn't compare to this year's Great Demonic Arts Tournament. Not to mention, in this year's Great Demonic Combat Arts Exhibition, a fairy tale had appeared out of nowhere. So, this year's Great Demonic Arts Tournament was very exciting, and many people were looking forward to it. And the last day of the Great Demonic Arts Tournament was quickly approaching. Today, the cheers of the audience were much louder than the previous days, and people's spirits began to soar. Under such circumstances, the finals of the Great Demonic Arts Tournament began. Unlike the previous days. On the last day of the Great Demonic Arts Tournament, there was no part of the tournament, nor was there a part of the duel, only a competition. Survival battle. The venue of the tournament was the entire Colokas. The teams of the major guilds would be scattered to different corners of Colokas, and would be free to move as soon as the tournament began. During the period of movement, there were no restrictions on methods, no restrictions on magic, and when they met, they could either fight or escape. No matter what, in the end, as long as an opponent couldn't continue to fight, they would get 1 point. This point would be added to the total score of each team. In addition, each team would have a captain. The captain's name list was not public. However, when the team leader was defeated, the team that defeated the team leader would receive 5 points, which would also be added to the total score. According to this calculation, when all the contestants in a team were defeated, they would be able to provide a high score of 9 points. Defeating all the contestants from other teams, the highest score would be 45 points. Therefore, even if it was Cotter Cerberus, who was currently in last place with only 12 points, they still had a chance to turn the tables and win the game. It was under such rules that the battle for survival unfolded. Unfortunately, not long after the start of the competition, the Blue Pegasus, whose individual strength was not very high, were all eliminated. Not long after, all of the members of the Cotter Cerberus were also eliminated and left the stage. As the tournament progressed, all but one member of the Mermaid Heel was eliminated, with the exception of Kagura, leaving behind only one person. Immediately after, in the Lamia scale, other than Kara, Leo, and Shirley's group, all the other members also left the stage. Next, under the cheers of the audience, the Fairy Tale and the Sabretooth were in an all-out battle. First, it was Grey versus Lucifer. The battle between the two magic users was one-sided at first, and Grey was suppressed by Lucifer. In the end, it was Grey who turned the tables and overturned Lucifer, obtaining victory. Next, it was Gadjaloo versus Logue. The duel between the two Dragon Slayer magic users was just like yesterday's duel. Gadjaloo completely crushed Rog, and in the end, he defeated Rog and won. Then, Laxus also encountered Alyaga. However, just as the duel between the two lightning-attributed mages was about to begin, Kara suddenly appeared and dealt with Alyaga with a single blow. Without Noah's participation, the strongest sorcerer in this year's Great Demon Combat Arts Drill was extremely powerful. Facing Kara, who was ranked 5th among the top 10 Saint Archmages, Laxus chose to fight. After a hard battle, with his whole body covered with wounds, Laxus defeated Kara with a single blow of the Dragon Slayer mystery, causing the audience to cheer. Then, Grey met up with Julian and encountered Leo and Shiria, who were also in the same team. After a hard battle, he defeated the two. However, what happened next was completely unexpected. Elusha encountered Kagura halfway, and after a wonderful hand-to-hand battle, she was interrupted by Maniba. Because of yesterday's tragedy, Maniba thoroughly hated Elusha. Therefore, during the duel between Elusha and Kagura, Maniba used her space magic to suddenly move behind Elusha and launch a sneak attack. At that time, Elusha didn't notice at all. However, Kagura, who was confronting Elusha, clearly saw Maniba appearing behind Elusha. So, Kagura directly took action and saved Elusha in Maniba's shock. Originally, Kagura was indebted to Noah, and Elusha was Simon's childhood friend who shared weal and woe with him. How could Kagura watch Elusha be attacked? Maniba, who didn't know this, was blinded by hatred. She ignored Kagura's existence and launched a sneak attack on Elusha, but her plan was ruined by Kagura, who disdained such an action. In the end, the furious Elusha and Kagura joined hands and cut down Maniba, defeating this despicable sneak attacker. After that, Elusha and Kagura once again had a fair duel. In the end, Elusha narrowly won and defeated Kagura, winning the duel. At this point, other than Fairy Tail and Saber-Tooth, the rest of the guilds had all left the stage. However, Elusha, Gray, Julian, Gadjaloo, and Laxus were all heavily injured and couldn't even stand properly. Saber-Tooth, on the other hand, only had one person left. That person was Justin. From beginning to end, Justin hadn't engaged in a large-scale battle. Whether it was his stamina or magic power, he was at his peak. Facing a group of opponents who couldn't even stand properly, Justin, who was at his peak, had no reason to lose. However, what happened next made everyone's jaws drop. Facing Elusha's team, Justin had a feeling that he couldn't win no matter what. Under the pressure of that feeling, Justin couldn't help but kneel in front of Elusha's team and choose to surrender. No one could have predicted this result. However, the victory of Fairy Tail still made the entire audience cheer, bringing the curtains to the Great Demon Battle Arts exhibition to an end. In the midst of the cheers that soared into the sky, no one would have thought of that at this moment. It was this shocking result that led to the beginning of the disaster that followed. In the hallway of the palace, Emerald, who was dressed as a Valkyrie, led a large group of people and walked towards the solar eclipse with a serious expression. Next to her, Dayton also had a serious expression and spoke in a deep voice. "I didn't expect it to be this result. This can only prove that what the future person said is true." Emerald's eyes flashed with determination. "In order to save this country, save this world, I will start the solar eclipse." At the same time, in the dragon graveyard, Noah was looking at a dragon skeleton, thinking about something. At a certain moment, a black shadow flashed behind Noah. Law raised his eyes and looked at Noah, who was looking at the dragon skeleton with his back to him, and said with surprise, "Since you really stayed until now, I thought you would leave. I also thought you wouldn't come, but didn't you come?" Noah turned and looked at Law. "Should I continue to call you Law? Or should I call you Roger?" Chapter 17:16. Rug. One of the 5 powerful archmages who belonged to Saber-Tooth and changed the name of Saber-Tooth. Not only did he have the magic crystal of Dragon Slayer magic in his body, but he had also been personally taught Dragon Slayer magic by Dragon. He was different from the first-generation Naz, Gadjaloo, and Wendy, and also different from the second-generation Laxus. He was known as the third-generation Dragon Slayer Archmage. He really began to take Rog seriously when he found out that he was a Dragon Slayer Archmage like Sting. At that time, Noah only had one impression of Rog: cold. This Dragon Slayer Archmage had a very cold personality. He was usually quite taciturn and only silently regarded defeating Gadjaloo as his goal. Moreover, he had not made a move in the Great Demonic Combat Arts exhibition, but his specific strength was much stronger than Naz, Gray, and Gadjaloo during the S-rank Archmage promotion exam 7 years ago. This was the information Noah knew about Rog. "So, I completely did not expect that you were Rog from the future." Noah looked at the evil man who called himself Rog in front of him, but whose real name was Rog, and narrowed his eyes slightly. "However, this can explain why the magic aura I feel from your body is so special." When Noah saw the future Rog for the first time, he inexplicably felt that there was something strange about him, which gave him a strange feeling that he was both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Now that he thought about it, there was no doubt that the feeling at that time was because this guy was Rog from the future. Therefore, Noah felt that the future Rog was both familiar and strange. As for that strange feeling, it was probably the Dragon Slayer magic on the future Rog. The magic used by this Dragon Slayer Archmage was the Shadow Dragon Slayer magic. In other words, Rog and the future Rog were both Dragon Slayer Archmages raised by Shadow Dragons. "It's just that you've changed a lot." Noah slightly sized up the future Rog. "If the feeling you give me in this era is cold, then the feeling you give me now is quite evil." To be more precise, it was rather evil. Noah had always sensed an evil aura from the future Rogue's body. That was not the temperament that a kind man or woman should have. In response, future Rogue only twitched his mouth and said in a non-committal manner, "Time will change a person. I'm no longer the idiot from 7 years ago, who only knew how to talk about Gadjaloo and think about how to defeat him." 7 years ago? Noah looked straight at future Rogue. "In other words, you came from 7 years in the future?" "That's right." Future Rogue opened his arms and admitted, "I transmigrated from the era 7 years later through the Eclipse Gate." Noah did not seem too surprised when he heard that. Instead, it was the future Rog who was surprised. "You don't seem too surprised." The smile on Future Rogue's face slowly disappeared. What? Haven't you always wanted to know about the solar eclipse project? You said it yourself. I want to know about the solar eclipse project. Noah glanced at Future Rogue. I already know about the solar eclipse. Otherwise, I wouldn't know that you're the Future Rogue. So, I'll skip this part. You just have to tell me what the solar eclipse project is, and that's all. Hearing this, Future Rogue frowned slightly. He couldn't help but have some doubts in his heart. Undoubtedly, Noah didn't have any special reaction to the term solar eclipse before, so he shouldn't know about the existence and power of the solar eclipse. How did he suddenly know about the solar eclipse? This question only flashed through Future Rogue's mind for a moment. Soon after, the Future Rogue tossed the matter aside and stared at Noah. The so-called solar eclipse plan is to use the mana collected during the 7 years of solar eclipse as a cannon and fire it. After opening the solar eclipse gate, we'll fire the solar eclipse cannons and destroy 10,000 attacking dragons. Destroy 10,000 attacking dragons. Noah was stunned. Solar eclipse has such power? But that's not right. If the solar eclipse really had such power, why didn't the solar eclipse cannons appear in Lucy's future era and destroy 10,000 dragons? Future Rogue didn't know that Noah had such doubts in his mind. He thought that Noah was shocked by the 10,000 attacking dragons. Maybe you won't believe me, but I have to tell you that after today, there will be 10,000 attacking dragons attacking this country. Future Rogue said in a deep voice. That's the real hell, a hell that no one can imagine. In my era, which is 7 years later, the world has been dominated by dragons. Less than 10% of humans survived. Future Rogue closed his eyes. That's why I came to this era from the future and asked Princess Emerald of this country to hold the Great Demon Battle Exhibition to collect the mana needed to activate the solar eclipse. When the dragons attack, the eclipse gate will be opened and the eclipse cannon will be launched to destroy 10,000 attacking dragons and save the future of this era. That's the plan for the solar eclipse. Future Rogue sighed. However, Princess Emerald didn't believe me. In order to make Princess Emerald trust me, I told her about a future I was familiar with. Only when the future I spoke of became true would Princess Emerald believe me. Then, she would open the solar eclipse and carry out the solar eclipse plan to save the future of this world. Hearing this, Noah's heart skipped a beat. The future you're talking about, don't tell me you're referring to the result of the Great Demon Battle Exhibition? That's right. Future Rogue nodded heavily. In the history I know, the Great Demon Battle Exhibition ended in a very special way. Fairy Tale's members were all unharmed, and the other guilds were all defeated. In the end, Sting was at his peak, but he felt that he couldn't defeat your guild, so he knelt down and surrendered. Once this happens, Princess Emerald will believe me and carry out the solar eclipse plan. At this point, the way the Future Rogue looked at Noah suddenly changed. However, I didn't expect you to appear at this time. Noah immediately understood what Future Rogue wanted to say. Since Noah didn't exist in Future Lucy's era, then Noah shouldn't exist in Future Rogue's era either. Under such circumstances, if a person who didn't exist in the history that the Future Rogue was familiar with suddenly appeared and joined the fairy tale that played a very important role in the future and displayed astonishing power, the Future Rogue would definitely panic. After all, with Noah's power, if he continued to be active in the Great Demon Battle Exhibition, the special result of Sting kneeling down and surrendering would most likely not appear. This way, Future Rogue's prophecy about Emerald would collapse on its own, and Emerald wouldn't execute the solar eclipse plan. At that time, Future Rogue's plan would be completely ruined. Why have I never heard of your existence in my era? I don't really understand. Maybe it's because I've transmigrated to this era and caused some changes in it? Future Rogue said. However, although you're very strong, no matter how strong you are, what can you do against 10,000 dragons? How many dragons can you defeat? 10? 100? Future Rogue shook his head. Unfortunately, your opponent is 10,000 dragons. With your power alone, you can't change the future. Therefore, the solar eclipse plan must be executed, Rogue said resolutely. Because of this, I have to think of a way to make you leave the Great Demon Battle Exhibition and let the outcome of the Great Demon Battle Exhibition develop towards the future I know. All of this is to save this world and save the future. This is what you want to know. I've already told you everything, Future Rogue said sincerely. You should be able to understand my words, right? Noah fell silent. However, in the next second, Noah calmly spoke. Unfortunately, you're lying. Chapter 17:17. At that moment, the expression on Future Logue's face froze. The atmosphere in the space suddenly became heavy, and the temperature around Noah and Rog seemed to have dropped a little, giving off a feeling that they were ready to draw their swords at any moment. After a while, Future Logue spoke with an unpleasant expression. What makes you say that? Don't you realize that your words contradict each other? Noah smirked. You just said that the solar eclipse can gather mana and fire it like a cannon, and that its power is enough to destroy 10,000 dragons, right? That's right. Future Logue nodded. Are you suspecting that the solar eclipse doesn't have such an effect? Or are you suspecting that the solar eclipse doesn't have such power? Basically, I'm suspecting both of these, Noah said as if he didn't notice Future Logue's unpleasant expression. If the solar eclipse really has the power to destroy 10,000 dragons, then in your era, you could have used this power to destroy the dragons, right? In my era, less than 10% of the human race was left. Even in this era, it would take 7 years to collect all the mana. How could we possibly collect all of it when less than 10% of the human race was left? The Future Logue asked loudly. That's not a reason for you to suspect me, right? You couldn't gather enough mana to activate the solar eclipse in your era. Noah looked at Future Logue with a faint smile. If that's the case, how did you come to this era? The Future Rogue suddenly froze. Since you were able to pass through the solar eclipse gate and come to this era, it means that you gathered enough mana to activate the gate in your era. Noah laughed coldly. Can't that mana be used to fire the solar eclipse cannon? In my era, the dragons had already taken over the world and were scattered all over the world, Future Logue said after a moment of silence. Even if there was enough mana to fire the solar eclipse cannon, it wouldn't be able to destroy the dragons that were scattered all over the world. Are you trying to say that the dragons would only gather at this time and attack the Fiori Kingdom? Noah looked indifferent. Then, even if 10,000 dragons were to gather and attack the Fiori Kingdom, it would be impossible for the solar eclipse cannon to cover the entire country and eliminate 10,000 dragons, right? Even if it couldn't eliminate all of them, it could at least eliminate most of them. Future Logue's tone became irritated. At this time, we should eliminate as many threats as we can. That way, the danger level would be much lower. I agree with you. Noah looked up and stared at the Future Rogue. As long as your real goal is to eliminate 10,000 dragons. Hearing this, the Future Rogue's expression darkened, and he sneered. In the end, you just don't trust me. Isn't that obvious? Noah smiled sarcastically. A person who can casually use the lives of 5 players from Raventail as bait to test me, and who can also use his emotions to threaten to kill the survivors of that guild and kidnap my companions without batting an eyelid. How can I believe the words of a person who is filled with evil energy? Not to mention, the so-called 10,000 dragons attack that you mentioned doesn't match the history that you told me before at all. Noah looked around him. You said that 400 years ago, the dragons were wiped out by Aconarolia. But now, 10,000 dragons suddenly appeared out of nowhere. That's a contradiction. So, I can only imagine that if what you said is true, how did the 10,000 WRMS come about? Noah suddenly smiled. For example, how did the dragons' corpses come back to life? Noah then turned his gaze to the Future Rogue as he spoke. Another example is that, like you, they came from different eras through the Eclipse Gate. When these words came out of Noah's mouth, the heavy atmosphere in the air suddenly exploded. Wang! Black mist surged from Future Rogue's body and turned into a black wind. It was like a viscous swamp, but also like a rolling black wave. It surged violently towards Noah. However, in the face of the surging pitch-black waves, Noah merely clenched his fist, and magical veins that looked like electric wires appeared on his arm. He then blasted them forward. Dong! The terrifying power turned into a terrifying shock wave, causing Noah's fist wind to be like a cannonball. It violently collided with the huge black wave that was surging over. With a loud muffled sound, the huge black wave exploded, scattering in all directions like sparks. However, the black fog that had spread in all directions did not disappear immediately. Instead, it seemed to have blended into the air and spread out, surrounding Noah. Then, Future Rogue's voice sounded from all directions. You are indeed an anomaly. Your existence has disrupted the history of this world, causing the future development and the direction of the era to become unpredictable. So, I think there should be a lot of people thanking me," Noah said as he used his sensing ability to search for future rogues' whereabouts. "If the determined future and history can't be changed, then let me mess it up. One's own fate must be controlled by oneself. Unfortunately, it's too late." Future Rogue's voice was still echoing in all directions. His actual body could not detect it at all. "The results of the great demonic martial arts competition are out. That princess must have started to believe me and is preparing to open the Eclipse Gate. It's too late for you to rush over now." Hearing this, Noah laughed in disdain. "Should I call you stupid? Or should I call you stupid? Do you think I've been waiting for you here all this time?" Future Rogue's breath stopped. Only now did the future Rogue realize that he had overlooked something of utmost importance. "Where's Xuanai?" Future Rogue asked in shock. "Why is Xuanai missing? Isn't that a matter of course?" Noah's eyes glowed brightly. "Although before this, I didn't know what Project Eclipse was, nor did I know what you were planning, but since it's called Project Eclipse, then there's no doubt that the core of this plan is a solar eclipse." Future Rogue was shocked when he heard Noah's words. "Looks like you've figured it out," Noah said mockingly. "That's right. Just in case, I've already sent Xuanai to guard the Eclipse Gate. No matter who tries to get close, Xuanai will stop them with all her might." "Damn it!" Future Rogue cursed angrily. Then, his voice disappeared. However, the surrounding black fog did not disperse and continued to surround Noah. Under Noah's sensing ability, Rogue's aura seemed to cover the entire area of the black fog. However, knowing that Xuanai was guarding the Eclipse Gate and was planning to stop anyone from getting close, Rogue would not stay here. "I see." Noah's expression darkened. "Only a projection came to see me, but his actual body doesn't dare to come in front of me?" That was to be expected. Future Rogue was afraid of Noah to begin with, so why would he personally come in front of Noah and risk his life? It was estimated that the future Rogue was like Jalal in the past, transferring half of his magic power to the body of thoughts in order to deceive Noah's perception. Part of the reason why Noah felt something off about future Rogue was because of this. In other words, from the very beginning, future Rogue had never let his actual body appear in front of Noah. The people who came in contact with Noah were only projections that possessed half of future Rogue's mana. Bang! On the mountain to the east of Coloches, the ground of the giant egg, Flapbird's meeting place suddenly exploded, creating a huge crater in the ground. From within, a ray of light flew out and rushed towards the sky. Then, it shot towards the direction of the palace. Chapter 17:18. Just as Noah had said, Emerald and her party were indeed obstructed. "You are!" Emerald, who was leading her party, exclaimed in surprise when she saw the girl standing in front of the Eclipse Gate. "Xuanai Agulia? Are you Princess Emerald of the Fiori Kingdom?" Xuanai's expression was unusually serious as she looked at Emerald and asked. "I'm sorry, I can't let you near the Eclipse Gate anymore." Xuanai's words made Emerald's expression turn from surprise to seriousness. "Do you know who you're talking to?" Dutton stepped forward and scolded. "The one standing in front of you is the Princess of the Fiori Kingdom. How dare you obstruct the princess? Sorcerer, we can punish you any time." "It doesn't matter," Xuanai replied without hesitation. "As long as I can complete Master Noah's orders, even if I have to sacrifice my insignificant life, it doesn't matter." Xuanai's resolute declaration made Dutton's expression stiffen, and he was speechless. Not to mention Dutton, even the soldiers who came with Emerald looked at each other. For a moment, they didn't know what to do. Under such circumstances, Emerald remained silent for a while, and then spoke softly. "I can feel that there is not a single bit of falsehood in your words. What an amazing determination. It seems that Lord Noah, who can make you offer up such determination, is not only outstanding in strength, but also in character. But this is not a reason for you to stop us," Emerald said loudly. "Miss Xuanai, please step aside. We have a reason to open the Eclipse Gate. If you continue to obstruct us, I'll have no choice but to have you taken down." "I've said it before, it doesn't matter." Xuanai raised her hand, and in her hand was a dazzling golden key. Her eyes were filled with determination. "But if you don't have the resolve to kill me, then you can't pass me." As she finished speaking, the key in Shuanai's hand emitted a dazzling light. Seeing this scene, the kingdom's soldiers raised the weapons in their hands and pointed them at Yuno. However, Emerald raised her hand and stopped the soldiers from acting rashly. Almost in the next second, a strange phenomenon occurred. The dazzling light emitted from the star elemental key in Shuanai's hand suddenly dimmed. Then, Shuanai sensed it. The mana that he had just instilled into the astral key in his hand suddenly went out of control. Together with most of the mana in his body, it was all pulled away by a force. What? Shuanai was shocked. Then, because of the loss of a large amount of demonic energy, her body went soft and she knelt on the ground. Seeing that Shuanai was at a loss, Emerald explained. Since you know this place, you should know that the purpose of our great demon martial arts exhibition is to gather mana for the solar eclipse. Meanwhile, this is the location of the solar eclipse gate. If you use spells in front of the solar eclipse gate, all of the mana available will be sucked away. You won't be able to fight here. Shuanai's pretty face suddenly changed. If you can't use magic, no matter how powerful you are as a magic shooter, you're just an ordinary girl. Dutton shook his head. Unfortunately, you can't stop the princess. Then, Dutton immediately waved his hand. A few soldiers stepped forward and held Shuanai up. Although Shuanai was weak, she still struggled desperately. Unfortunately, just as Dutton said, without mana, Shuanai was just an ordinary girl. There was no way she could fight against a group of men, let alone break free from the restraint of a few soldiers. Under such circumstances, Shuanai could only watch as Emerald and the others walked to the solar eclipse gate and came to the device next to the solar eclipse gate. That person from the future used Miss Shuanai's key to open a part of the lock. Previously, we also used Lucy Hartfilia's key to open the rest of the lock. Now, the solar eclipse gate's lock is completely open. We can open the gate at any time. Emerald stared at the device in front of her. Then she turned her head and looked at Dutton. How's the preparation going? The whole city has entered the highest level of alert. We have also arranged for people to go to the border to monitor. If the dragons appear, we will be able to get the news immediately. Dutton replied. In addition, the soldiers have also begun to evacuate the residents of the city. The magic shooters who came to participate in the Great Demon Battle Exhibition are being summoned. They have already gathered in the central square of Coloches. Very good. Emerald nodded. After the dragons appear, we will immediately fire the eclipse cannons to destroy the dragons. However, no matter what, there are 10,000 of them. By then, there will definitely be some survivors. We need the power of the magic shooters to fight against the dragons. We must not neglect them. I understand. Dutton pondered for a moment, then glanced at the struggling Shuanai. However, that starling magic shooter seems to have agreed to Noah Doria's request to stop us from opening the gate. Should we treat Noah Doria and Fairy Tale as enemies? We must not do that. Emerald hurriedly said. Although I don't know what's going on, that lord's power is much greater than that of an ordinary person. He will be our trump card to destroy the remaining dragons. Moreover, there are many powerful magic shooters in Fairy Tale. We cannot lose this powerful force. However, Noah Doria asked Shuanai Agulia to stop the gate from opening. Does this mean that he intends to make an enemy of the kingdom? Dutton frowned. When the time comes, what if he helps the dragons to fight against the kingdom? That lord may not know the true purpose of the Eclipse Project, nor does he know that 10,000 dragons are about to attack. Perhaps like you, he thinks that we intend to use the eclipse to change history. That's why he wants to stop us. Emerald looked at Dutton seriously. Could it be that you, who did the same thing as that lord, also intend to help the dragons to fight against the kingdom? Dutton was speechless. You can't be too presumptuous. Emerald raised her head and looked at the eclipse gate. I don't think that lord has any ill intentions towards us. Although he is different from us and possesses great power, he is still a human. He wouldn't just watch the dragons destroy our country and destroy this world. Your Highness is right, Dutton said helplessly. Then what should we do now? Hearing this, Faitsue closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened her eyes again, her eyes were full of determination. Emerald then ordered, "Open it." The eclipse gate. Emerald reached out and grabbed the handle of the device in front of her. She twisted it and turned it on. Gotcha! On the magnificent gate called the Eclipse Gate, there was a clear sound, as if some mechanism had been activated. Under the gaze of Emerald and the others, the sun, moon, and stars imprinted on the gate began to move. Then the gate slowly opened. Clang! As the Eclipse Gate slowly opened, a blinding light shone out from the gate. Everyone held their breaths as they looked at the light coming from behind the door. Until the dazzling door was completely open. The entire place fell silent. Rumble. Suddenly, the entire ground began to tremble. What? What's going on? What's going on? The soldiers of the kingdom's army began to panic. Emerald and Dutton were equally shocked. They tried their best to stabilize themselves as they stood up in panic. Princess, Dutton said in panic. What's going on? Emerald was also at a loss. She looked at the gate. The next moment, Emerald's expression froze. Dong. Following the sound of heavy footsteps, a ferocious dragon claw covered in scales reached out from the Eclipse Gate and landed on the ground. Chapter 17:19. Dong! When the ferocious dragon claw reached out of the huge door called the solar eclipse and slammed into the ground, an astonishing shockwave erupted from the center of the ferocious dragon claw, sending shockwaves in all directions. That impact was simply like a terrifying typhoon above the 12th grade. It was like an explosion, causing the entire ground to be shaken until cracks spread out like a spider web. Ah! The armed soldiers were all blown away by the shockwave amidst a series of cries of agony. They were like pieces of trash as they were blasted away in an extremely clean manner. Xuan Ai, who was restrained by a group of soldiers, didn't even have time to react before the soldiers who were tightly restraining her were also sent flying. Instead, Xuan Ai broke free from her restraints and laid on the ground. As if she was in a typhoon, she was blown so hard that she couldn't even open her eyes. Because Jade was lying on the ground, she was able to avoid being blown away. But she could not close her eyes. She stared in the direction of the Eclipse Gate. Her eyes were full of shock. Under such circumstances, the ferocious dragon claw was raised once again, and its owner slowly walked out of the door. Not long after, everyone present, including Emerald, Yuan Ai, Dutton, and the soldiers who were blown away by the wind, saw it. A giant dragon walked out of the huge door called Solar Eclipse. In front of the shocked eyes of Fei Tsue and the others, the giant dragon that came out of the Solar Eclipse Gate opened its pair of scarlet eyes. It raised its huge head and roared towards the sky. Roar, roar, roar! The deafening roar was like the sound of a bell announcing the end of this era. It turned into a sound wave that was loud enough to form a clear echo. It was like a substantial shock wave that erupted once again. At the same time, all the sorcerers in Colokas who were still in the city clearly heard the draconic roar that resounded across the sky. At that moment, the magic shooters from guilds all over the kingdom turned their heads and looked towards the source of the dragon's roar, which was the direction of the palace. Then, everyone saw this scene. They saw huge black shadows flapping their wings that seemed to be able to blot out the sun. They rode the wind and flew into the sky one after another. Moreover, as time passed, more and more huge black shadows soared into the sky from the palace. In the end, there were so many of them that they could form a wave. Until a certain moment, the huge black shadows that soared into the sky from the palace finally stopped appearing. However, the huge black shadows were so many that they filled the entire sky. In the next second, the huge black shadows roared towards the sky. Roar, roar, roar! An extremely terrifying roar transformed into a tangible sound wave that poured down from the sky. Like a tidal wave, it surged towards all of Colokas from all directions. At this moment, under the terrifying sound waves, the buildings began to shake and crumble. At this moment, the ground began to tremor under the terrifying sound wave. At this moment, under the terrifying sound wave, the magic shooters covered their ears and screamed. At this moment, under the terrifying sound wave, the magic shooters in Colokas all felt an indescribable chill in their hearts. Thus, the disaster began. Under everyone's gazes, the dragons that filled the entire sky all spat out breaths that carried various attributes but also contained terrifying power toward the city that was called the City of Flowers. Bam! 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 The dragon's breath that descended from the sky landed on the buildings one after another, completely destroying them, setting off bursts of flames and setting off waves of impact. Amidst the continuous sounds of explosions, ruins were created one after another. In just a split second. The entire Coloca's turned into a sea of fire. The high mages that had been thrown to the ground by that frightening burst of wind looked at Crocus, who had been perfectly fine a second ago, but now suddenly turned into a sea of flames. It was as if they had lost their souls, and they couldn't react. In the palace that was surrounded by waves of fire, Emerald knelt on the ground and looked at the ferocious dragons that filled the entire sky. She seemed to be in a daze as tears flowed down her cheeks. Seeing this, a huge question in Emerald's heart was finally answered. Why would the dragons, which were almost extinct 400 years ago, gather in groups of 10,000 to attack the kingdom of Fiori and rule the world 400 years later? The reason was simple. It was because the dragons that attacked did not belong to this era. They came here from another era through the Eclipse Gate. 400 years ago, the dragon clan still ruled the world, and Econarolia had yet to appear. In other words, the purpose of the future person who advised Emerald was not to use the mana collected by the eclipse as a cannon to destroy 10,000 dragons. The real purpose of the future Rog was to borrow the power of the eclipse to summon 10,000 dragons from 400 years ago. However, it was unrealistic for the future Rog to gather all the mana to activate the eclipse by himself. Therefore, the future Rog used Emerald to get the kingdom to collect the mana for him. This is the real eclipse project, the eclipse project that belongs to me. After saying these words, the future Roger slowly walked out of the sea of fire and arrived in front of Fatesue, who had tears streaming down her face. Looking at the group of 10,000 giant dragons that blotted out the sky, Roger grinned and finally laughed out loud. Now, the eclipse project that belongs to me is finally completed. A total of 10,000 dragons will be under my command. I will become the true Dragon King and rule this world. Emerald clenched her fists and stared at the future Rog with eyes full of anger and hatred. She squeezed out a voice with difficulty. What is your purpose? The future Rog suddenly smiled. His smile looked abnormally evil under the illumination of the fire. Then the future Rog opened his mouth. I've said it before. In my era, the world was dominated by dragons. However, that didn't refer to a group of dragons formed by 10,000 dragons. Instead, it referred to the Dragon King who had once slaughtered the entire dragon race and was born from the blood of dragons Econarolia. Emerald was shocked. Econalia? The dragon that ruled the world in the future was not the 10,000 dragons, but the black dragon that was recorded in the Revelation? This is the truth. The future Rog narrowed his eyes. 7 years later, the world will be ruled by the Dragon King that exists only for slaughter and destruction. People will live in fear every day. In that kind of world, there is only despair and pain left. In order to escape from Econalia's control, I created a secret technique that can control dragons, which is the so-called dragon control magic. The future Rog clenched his teeth and said with hatred. However, I don't know if it's because Econalia's nature is human, or if it's because he's too powerful. My dragon control magic has no effect on him. In the end, I could only escape from the era of Econalia's control and come up with a plan. The eclipse doesn't have the effect of a cannon. It's just a door that connects to time. The future Rog smiled as if he had gotten his way. Originally, by adjusting the time, we could enter the flow of time at will and go to any designated era. However, on the night of the eclipse before the 7th of July, this door will only connect to one era. Connect to 400 years ago, when the dragon race still existed, and summon all 10,000 dragons from the past. The future Log spread his arms, and with a huge group of dragons as the background, he raised his head and laughed loudly. Next, I will use my dragon control magic to control the group of dragons and challenge Econalia. At that time, I will become the new Dragon King and rule this world. After saying that, the future Rog grinned and raised his hand. His hand fluctuated with a black mist. Your Highness, thank you for helping me so much, but you're already useless. Rest in peace and die. As soon as he finished speaking, the black fog in his hand suddenly exploded and turned into a black arrow. Like a bullet, it violently shot towards Emerald, who was kneeling on the ground. Emerald just stared blankly at this scene and didn't even think of resisting. At this moment, a black shadow appeared in front of Fei Chui and gently waved his hand at the black arrow that was coming towards her. Bang! The black arrow that could pierce through a human body was directly smacked away, turning into bits of black mist and disappearing. Your plan is quite thorough. A voice gradually sounded. I just don't know. Have you ever thought about how those 10,000 dragons will die? Chapter 17:20. Huff, 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 huff. In the sky, the sound of giant dragons flapping their wings reverberated clearly in the surroundings, incessantly lingering in the ears. In the blazing sea of fire, the future rogue stared at Noah, who had suddenly appeared without any warning. He couldn't help but gasp in shock. So you came after all? Noah Dole. Noah didn't care about the future rogue. He first glanced at Jade, who was sitting on the ground, paralyzed. She had yet to recover from the shock of being used. Then he looked at the person in his arms. In Noah's arms was Xuanai, who was still in a state of shock. She looked at the giant dragons in the sky for a long time, unable to recover from her shock. Clearly, Xuanai didn't expect that the so-called 10,000 giant dragons had actually come from the space-time gate called the solar eclipse. They had come from 400 years ago to this world. Looking at Xuanai, Noah spoke softly. Where's future Lucy? Lord Noah? Xuanai finally reacted and answered truthfully. Future Lucy isn't with me. When we were guarding the solar eclipse, we found out that future Lucy was imprisoned by the kingdom. Hence, future Lucy went to save Lady Lucy. Is that so? Noah nodded calmly and helped Xuanai up from his arms. He protected her behind his back and looked straight ahead. If that's the case, Xuanai, take that princess over there and leave this place together. Find your companions from the guild and move with them. Then what about Lord Noah? Xuanai quickly asked. What about Lord Noah? Me. Noah curled his lips into a smile and said without turning his head. I'll stay. You don't have to worry about me. Xuanai opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. However, before she could finish, she was interrupted by the future rogue. Leave. The future rogue sneered. No, none of you can leave. As he finished, the future rogue raised his hand. Roar. In the sky, one of the huge dragons suddenly roared and turned into an arrow that was shot from a bow. It swooped down, bringing with it a whistling atmosphere and a strong wind. It was like a huge meteorite that rushed towards Noah. Lord Noah! Xuanai cried out in surprise. However, Noah merely coldly stared at the enormous dragon that was charging down from the sky toward him with an extremely powerful momentum. He clenched his hand into a fist. Wang! Magic patterns that looked like electric wires crawled up Noah's arm. After being strengthened by magic and the endless magical power provided by the third perpetual motion mechanism, at this moment, a terrifying power surged into Noah's arm. Bang! With a loud explosion, Noah soared into the sky and punched the chest of the huge dragon that was swooping down. Dong! When Noah's fist landed on the huge dragon's chest, a loud heavy sound that sounded like a bell rang in the air. Then, the huge dragon that was swooping down with a huge momentum was blasted away. It turned into a cannonball and flew back at a speed faster than when it came, crashing heavily into a building. The huge building was smashed into pieces by the huge dragon and turned into rubble. The huge dragon was buried in the rubble and could no longer be seen. The future rogue's expression froze on his face. Xuanai covered her mouth, and her eyes were filled with surprise. Even Jade, who had been sitting on the ground, widened her eyes and looked at Noah, who was slowly descending from the sky and standing firmly on the ground. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. Not to mention these people, even the dragons in the sky had completely stopped roaring. For a moment, they actually stopped moving. Under such circumstances, Noah raised his eyes and looked at the future rogue, and said sarcastically, If you summoned a god, then maybe I would have to worry. But you summoned a group of dragons that will sooner or later die in the hands of Aconerolia. You want to kill me? Even if you summon 10,000 more, it won't be enough. After saying that, Noah ignored the future rogue's furious expression and glanced at Xuanai. Hurry up and take the princess away. Xuanai, otherwise once I fight with all my strength, you will be affected. Xuanai was startled and quickly nodded. At this time, Jade's eyes were also filled with hope. Please save this country. Sir Noah. Jade seemed to be grabbing onto the last life-saving straw. She crawled behind Noah and grabbed Noah's clothes and shouted with hope. Now, only you have a way to save this country. Noah turned his head and looked at Jade's tear-stained eyes that were filled with hope. After a while, he nodded. I will do my best. Faitsue bit her lips and held back her tears. She buried the endless gratitude in her heart and stood up with difficulty. Xuanai immediately supported Jade, but her eyes remained on Noah and whispered, Sir Noah, please be careful. After leaving this sentence, Xuanai supported Jade and walked towards the center of Kolochas. This time, the future rogue didn't stop Xuanai and Jade, but only stared at Noah. Only the huge group of dragons in the sky looked at the gradually leaving Xuanai and Jade, and more or less became restless. Looking at the restless group of dragons, Noah raised his eyebrows and said to the future rogue with a faint smile, It seems that with your strength, even if you have magic that can control dragons, you still can't completely control a group of 10,000 dragons. I don't need to completely control the group of dragons. The future rogue's face darkened and said coldly, I only need to let them destroy and give them a target. That's enough. It's because of this forced method that you're able to keep 10,000 dragons here, right? Noah pursed his lips. If you want the dragons to completely obey your orders, with your ability, you can only control a dozen of them. Being able to control a dozen of them at once is enough. The future rogue smiled calmly. As for you, can you really deal with 10,000 dragons on your own? As he said this, a surge of mana surged from his body. The mana turned into an invisible network that connected to the dragons in the sky, causing them to roar at Noah. The sound waves shook Noah's robes and made Noah's robes flutter. Against the surging sound waves, Noah's eyes flashed slightly. With Noah's superb perception ability, he could completely sense it. In the sky, among the huge group of dragons, although the auras of the dragons were very powerful, they were uneven. Among the group of dragons, the strongest could probably reach the top of the 5 digits, comparable to the gods in the box. However, the weakest ones were probably at the bottom of the 5 digits, comparable to the 10 great Saint Magi. Although they were all in the 5 digits, the gap was just that big. However, just now, when Noah sent the dragon flying with a punch that reached the level of a god, he discovered that the dragon's scales were abnormally hard. With the strength of the dragon's scales, there was probably no human archmage who could cause damage to them. Unless they were like Naz, Gadjaloo, and Wendy, who specialized in dragon-slaying magic. It's a pity that they're only in the 5 digits and can't pose a threat. At some point, a silver dagger appeared in Noah's hand. Aster, if it's you, you should be able to easily cut off those dragon scales, right? Of course. Aster's voice sounded in Noah's mind. I'm Master's sword. As long as Master swings his sword, there's nothing that Master can't cut open. Hearing this, Noah suddenly smiled and chanted softly. Cold Steel Queen, the holy sword that slays demons and demons, turn into a sword of steel and bestow me with divine power. A dazzling white light bloomed from the silver dagger, instantly illuminating the entire night sky. Looking at the dazzling radiance, Future Logue abruptly ordered, All of you go. In the sky, the huge group of dragons roared and rushed down, covering the sky and covering the earth, towards the dazzling white light. The battle was about to start. Chapter 17:21. Thud. Thud, thud. Rubble fell from the ruined buildings from time to time, smashing into the ground, causing a series of crisp sounds. The surrounding buildings were on fire, and the streets were filled with a sea of fire. Xuanai held onto Emerald and rushed towards the center of Crocus as fast as she could. Roar, 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 roar. In the sky, deafening dragon roars continued to resound, causing waves of sound to blow into the sea of fire, fanning the flames. Xuanai held onto Emerald while braving the surrounding fire and wind. She lifted her head and looked up at the sky. In the sky, several giant dragons were constantly circling back and forth, breathing scorching hot breaths at the buildings below, destroying the city. Future Logue's dragon mastery magic could not control the large number of dragons in the end. Even though he forced most of the dragons to stay at the palace and hold the fort, there were still some that broke away and completely ignored Future Logue's orders, wreaking havoc in Crocus. The 10,000 dragons that the Future Logue had summoned from the era of 400 years ago were probably all dragons that viewed humans as food and livestock, and were against the idea of living together with humans. Therefore, these dragons did not hesitate to destroy this city that was filled with the aura of humans. There was no mercy at all. Under such circumstances, Crocus was constantly being destroyed by the dragons' breaths. Fortunately, Emerald had asked the soldiers of the royal army to evacuate the ordinary citizens in the city before opening the eclipse portal. Otherwise, there would have been a great number of casualties. Emerald's heart was tormented by guilt as she watched the surrounding buildings being destroyed by the dragon's breaths, and Croca's, which was located in the palace, gradually being destroyed. All of this was his fault for opening the solar eclipse door. This sentence echoed in Emerald's heart as she suffered from the torment of guilt. At this moment, a dragon's breath descended from the sky and landed heavily on a building next to Xuanai and Emerald. Boom! The scorching breath blew up the building in an instant, stirring up thick flames and explosive winds, causing rubble and debris to splatter in all directions. Caught off guard, Xuanai and Fei Chui were thrown to the ground by the impact of the blast. They let out a cry of surprise. "Princess!" Xuanai struggled to get up and supported Fei Chui, who was beside her. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Fei Chui shook her head and looked at the snow. "Miss Xuanai, please don't bother with me and quickly run away." "No." Xuanai rejected without hesitation. "How can I abandon the princess?" "But, I am the one who attracted the dragons. I am the one who caused this country, and even the world, to face the threat of 10,000 dragons." Emerald said in grief. "My sins are heavy enough. Even if I die here, I won't be able to make up for it. If you die to save me, I won't be able to face Lord Noah, who is fighting for this country. So, even if you're alone, please leave quickly." "Princess, you were only used. You didn't do anything wrong." Xuanai didn't compromise. "Moreover, the one who asked me to bring you to a safe place is Lord Noah. If I abandon you here, I won't be able to face Lord Noah. Please leave with me." After saying that, Xuanai forcefully helped Fei Chui up. Without any other choice, Fei Chui could only let Xuanai do as she pleased. However, in the next moment, Fei Chui caught a glimpse of the scene above. Her pretty face changed abruptly and she shouted, "Run!" Before Xuanai could react, a wave of shocking wind fell from the sky and hit the place where Xuanai and Fei Chui were, extinguishing the surrounding flames. Immediately, Xuanai hurriedly raised her head and looked at the sky. There, a huge dragon slowly descended. Its eyes stared at Xuanai and Fei Chui, flashing a playful light. Being stared at by those eyes, Xuanai and Fei Chui felt their bodies become cold. They couldn't even move. Soon after, the giant dragon slowly opened its mouth. Inside, a surge of flames was surging and compressing continuously. Just as the huge dragon's flame breath was about to land on Xuanai and Fei Cui's body, a dazzling lightning suddenly shot out and swept across the sky. With an extremely fast speed, it suddenly landed on the huge dragon's body. Bang! The dazzling lightning directly hit the huge dragon's head, causing a burst of thick blood to sputter out. Like a splash of water, it sprinkled all around. Rumble! The huge dragon, whose entire head was blown away, fell to the ground and gradually lost its vitality. Looking at this scene, Xuanai and Fei Chui were stunned on the spot. However, an indifferent voice immediately woke them up. "Don't be in a daze there. Hurry up and leave." Xuanai and Fei Chui were shocked. They subconsciously turned their heads and looked at the source of the voice. In the surging sea of flames, a petite figure was suspended in the air. The silver hair was as dazzling as the moonlight. The snake-like eyes were very coquettish. A quiet and noble temperament pervaded the petite figure. That scene was like the arrival of a goddess, so beautiful that it made people speechless. "You," Xuanai said with some hesitation. "You are." "I'm just following my master's orders to protect you," Athena said calmly. "So don't be in a daze there. Hurry up and leave here to meet up with your companions." Xuanai and Fei Chui looked at each other. Knowing that now was not the time to get to the bottom of it, they nodded in unison and continued to rush to their destination. Athena turned her head and looked in the direction of the palace. An inexplicable brilliance flashed in her coquettish snake eyes. "You are my fated person. A mere dragon group naturally can't do anything to you, but you have to be careful." Saying this, Athena closed her eyes. "There is one. No, two very evil and dark auras approaching. You may have to spend some effort to deal with them." Clang! In the sky above the palace, the dazzling silver light was like a shining sun, constantly gushing out from the dragon group, dyeing the surrounding sea of flames into another color. "Ha! In the center of the dazzling white light, Noah roared. The demon slayer in his hand drew a cold arc of light, like moonlight, sweeping across the surroundings. Ultimate sword technique. Form 3 Shadow Moon Dance. The moonlight slash swept across the space, and like an arc, it suddenly appeared. In the sudden appearance of the moonlight, a roaring dragon that was rushing towards Noah's direction had just touched a little, and a white line immediately appeared on the part of its body that came into contact with the moonlight. Poochie! The moment the white line appeared, the dragon's body immediately followed the white line and directly broke into two halves, along with a large amount of blood, falling from the sky. And it was not only that one dragon that came into contact with the moonlight slash. Poochie poochie poochie. Accompanied by a series of ripping sounds, the giant dragons were all cut in half, bringing bursts of blood with them as they rained down from the sky. Apart from the dragon slayer magic, no other sorcerer could break through the scales, but under the elven magic equipment called the demon slayer, it was as fragile as a piece of paper. Holding such a terrifying holy sword in his hand, Noah continued to charge into the group of dragons, killing them one after another. His whole body was bathed in dragon blood. His figure was like a ghost. On the ground, Future Logue, who was watching this scene with his own eyes, shouted. Don't go near him. Use your breath. Use long-range attacks. Receiving Future Logue's order, the dragons surrounding Noah suddenly opened their ferocious beastly mouths, gathering a wave of magic. In the next moment, the dragon's breath shot towards Noah's direction, landing on his body. The powerful breath exploded on Noah's location, turning into a burst of fire, vibrating in the air. Chapter 17:22. On the ground, a victorious smile appeared on Future Logue's face as he watched the flames explode in the sky. However, in the next second, that smile froze on Future Logue's face and mid-air. The flames that exploded in the sky suddenly trembled, and like streams of air, they all began to converge towards the center. There, Noah raised the holy sword in his hand high up, and absorbed all the surrounding flames into the holy sword. Immediately, streams of scorching flames converged on the holy sword's body, circling around the bright sword as it expanded. Noah held the holy sword's hilt tightly, and with a crouch, his entire body shot out like a bullet, instantly catapulting in front of the group of dragons closest to him. Absolute sword technique. Form 4 Flame Slash. The holy sword that was surging with scorching flames heavily slashed down. Pang! Flames that were even more shocking than before suddenly exploded, turning into a wave of scorching flames. In an instant, it covered the group of dragons, and a violent shockwave shook the group of dragons nearby away, scattering the entire group of dragons in an instant. Then, in the scorching flames one by one, the dragons fell from the sky as if their bodies were being roasted, smashing onto the ground, causing the ground to tremble. Future Logue could only try his best to stabilize his body, looking at the dragon corpses all around him, and the dragon blood that splattered everywhere. His entire body trembled. That guy, is he really a monster? Just as Noah predicted, the scales and body of a dragon were extremely hard. Not only was their defense against physical attacks high, but their resistance against magic was also unimaginably high. Apart from the dragon slayer magic, it was almost impossible to find any magic that was effective against a dragon. At least it was like that in this world. Therefore, even if it was the weakest 5-digit dragon, it was still possible for a human to win. Even if one mastered the dragon slayer magic, wanting to defeat a dragon was a very difficult thing to do. Not everyone could become an existence like a Conarolia. It was precisely because of this that the Future Logue, a dragon-slaying archmage who used the shadow attribute dragon-slaying magic, created another dragon-slaying magic that could control dragons instead of fighting them head-on. However, in front of Noah, the WYRMS the humans could not defeat at all were like the most fragile lizards that were killed one after another. How could that kind of thing happen? If humans could really have this level of power, how could the world be controlled by Aconalia? Future Logue roared at Noah, who was in mid-air. It's impossible for a human to defeat a dragon. Future Logue's body, as if he was in a frenzy, formed an invisible network that connected to the dragons. Roar, roar, roar. The dragons immediately roared in unison. Their roars were filled with rage. Future Logue was unwilling to believe that a human could defeat a dragon, but how could those dragons, who regarded humans as food and livestock, believe that a mere human could single-handedly challenge a group of 10,000 dragons? Seeing one dragon after another die under Noah's holy sword, The rest of the dragons were incomparably furious and also went crazy. Therefore, there was no need for future Log to give the order. The giant dragons flapped their wings and charged towards Noah in groups. Noah's eyes flashed as he hovered in mid-air, his gaze sweeping the surroundings. As far as Noah's eyes could see, there were dragons charging in his direction from all directions, surrounding him in the middle. At that moment, Noah tightened his grip on the holy sword, and the divine power in his body was channeled to the maximum extent he could control, causing the sword to emit an unprecedented dazzling light, illuminating the entire night sky as bright as day. Then, one dragon after another rushed into the dazzling light. Clang! Sword light flashed in the space. Pang! A dragon's breath swept past. Poochie poochie poochie. Tearing sounds were incessant, causing the dragons to be cut in half one after another. Pang 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 pang. Waves of explosions also shook the air, causing the astonishing flames to surge in the dark night, making it seem magical and illusory. Noah's figure was constantly flashing in mid-air, charging back and forth among the dragons. The holy sword in his hand was constantly swinging, and every time he swung, a dazzling sword light would be drawn, killing a dragon. Meanwhile, the dragons charged in Noah's direction fearlessly, spewing breaths of various attributes from their mouths, attacking Noah's figure that was too small compared to the dragons, causing explosions to ring out incessantly. However, as time passed, Noah didn't suffer any injuries at all. Even his physical strength seemed to be bottomless as he continued to charge, and charge. Compared to Noah, the dragons in the astonishingly large number of dragons were killed one after another, causing a large amount of blood to fall to the ground. On one side, there was a lone human. On the other side, there was a massive number of dragons. Originally, it should have been a completely different battle situation. In the eyes of others, there was a huge disparity in the battle, but it was a one-sided massacre by the humans. And this battle situation was predestined from the beginning. Comparing the advantages of both sides, it was easy to understand. Although Noah had lost his authority, sovereignty, ability value, and even his treasure vault, Aster was the strongest sword spirit that even the Elven King, who was the embodiment of the elements of the world, was afraid of. With the support of the third perpetual motion mechanism spiritual core, and the support of unlimited divine power, this power was unleashed without any restrictions, and its power could be imagined. In addition, the sword dance of controlling the spirits belonged to the highest level of ultimate sword skills, and Noah could be ranked among the 4 digits. On the other side, the strength of the dragons was uneven. The strongest was at the top of the 5 digits, and the weakest was at the bottom of the 5 digits. However, in the situation where there were as many as 10,000 dragons, even if none of the dragons could be ranked among the 4 digits, they wouldn't be slaughtered by Noah alone. The problem was that although Noah had lost his authority, he still had the physique of a god slayer. Mysteries that didn't reach the level of a god couldn't be effective against Noah. Therefore, the magic of the dragons couldn't be effective against Noah. But Noah's elven magic device could easily break through the tough dragon scales that were almost impossible for humans to break. In this way, even if there were more dragons, how could they do anything to Noah? If Athena hadn't been sent by Noah to protect her companions in Kulukasli, and if she didn't have the lightning of salvation and the heavenly sword of salvation in her hands, the dragons would have all died. Looking at the dragons falling one after another under Noah's sword, the future Log was terrified. Monster, that guy, is definitely a monster. At this moment, in the eyes of the future Log, a figure appeared behind Noah who was killing the dragons. That figure was none other than Aconarolia. One was a human. The other was a dragon king. Both of them were monsters. Could it be that after being dominated by Aconarolia, he, who had escaped to this era, would be defeated by a human? Don't joke around. The future Log roared in anger. I definitely won't lose here again. After saying that, a burst of magic surged from the future Log's body. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of the future Log, stretched out his hand, and pressed his face. Noah, who was holding the silver holy sword, looked straight at the future Log, his eyes full of coldness. So noisy. After saying that, Noah's hand suddenly tightened, and he directly grabbed the future Log's face, lifted him up, and slammed him heavily on the ground. Bang! The future Log didn't even have time to react before his whole body was slammed on the ground, causing the ground to crack. Chapter 1723. Cough. The strong impact from his back shook his internal organs, causing him to cough up blood on the spot. Blood splattered on Future Rogue's face, staining his sinister face. In fact, Future Rogue wasn't weak. In this era, Future Rogue's strength was already very outstanding. He was much stronger than Naz and Gadjaloo, who participated in the S-rank promotion exam. As a magic shooter, even if he couldn't be said to be at the peak, he was definitely in the ranks of the powerful. Future Rogue came from 7 years in the future. 7 years of bitter struggle in a world dominated by Aeconarolia. One could well imagine how powerful Rogue would become in the future. At least, with Future Rogue's strength, it wouldn't be strange to say that he could stand shoulder to shoulder with Alusha and Kagura. However, facing an existence that could solo 10,000 dragons, Future Rogue had no power to fight back. It was still the same sentence. It wasn't that Future Rogue was too weak. It was just that Noah's strength couldn't be considered on the same level as human magic shooters. Damn. Future Rogue struggled to get up. But before Future Rogue could struggle to get up, a flashing holy sword was suddenly pressed against Future Rogue's neck. The cold touch from the front of his neck made Future Rogue freeze. Future Rogue could only slowly raise his head and look in front of him. There, Noah was holding a silver holy sword and pointing it at Future Rogue's throat. His eyes were abnormally cold. I don't know what kind of desperate life you lived in your era, but because of that, you came to this era and used everything you could to summon 10,000 dragons for you to manipulate and conquer the world for you. How is that different from Aeconarolia? Noah's gaze fell on Future Rogue, giving Future Rogue an indescribable sense of oppression. You can't even protect your own future, yet you want to take away someone else's future. Your defeat was already destined. Shut up! Future Rogue hysterically roared. If it weren't for you, if it wasn't for you, I will definitely not lose here. Hearing this, Noah laughed in disdain. However, before Noah could say anything, another voice rang out in this space. No, even without this person, you can't win. The sudden voice startled the Future Rogue. Noah narrowed his eyes and turned his head to look at the source of the voice. Tap, 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 tap. Amidst a series of extremely clear footsteps, a figure seemed to be slowly approaching from the distant horizon in the sea of fire. Step by step, the figure stepped on the waves of fire and came into the vision of Noah and the Future Rogue. It was a young man who looked much younger than Noah. His short black hair swayed as if there was no wind. A pair of black eyes flickered with flames. He was dressed in black with a long white cloth tied around his chest. On his body, a deep darkness seemed to be stirring, causing the surrounding sounds to disappear all at once. Looking at this person, no matter who it was, they would have two feelings. 1. This was an unfathomable yet extremely ordinary person. 2. This was a harmless yet extremely dangerous person. The youth who had gathered two completely contradictory qualities into a single body hence walked with clear and quiet steps, arriving before Noah and the Future Rogue. Immediately, the other party's eyes gathered on Noah as a harmless smile appeared on his face. We meet again. I'm very happy to see you again. These words were undoubtedly from the bottom of his heart. This was because no one could hear a trace of falsehood from the young man's words. As a matter of fact, she was genuinely happy to see Noah again. After all, among all the people I've met, you're the one who's most likely to kill me. Hearing this, Nuya's eyes gradually narrowed. He softly spoke and revealed the identity of the person who had come. Jerf. That's right. The young man who appeared in front of Noah was none other than Jeffrey, who was exuding a contradictory aura. The most ferocious and evil dark magician in history. Jerf? The Future Rogue gazed at Jerf in astonishment. It was apparent that even the Future Rogue didn't expect to see this legendary figure here. However, Jerf didn't care about the Future Rogue at all. 7 years ago, I saw the battle between you and Aeconarolia on Heavenly Wolf Island, Jerf said with a nostalgic sigh. Originally, I had thought that you would definitely be destroyed by Aeconarolia. Who would have thought that in the end, not only did you not lose to Aeconarolia, you even seriously injured him. At that time, I was truly shocked. The Future Rogue widened his eyes to the maximum after hearing Jerf's words. His gaze towards Noah changed from resentment to shock. Heavily injured Aeconarolia? In the Future Rogue's era, the world had been dominated by Aeconarolia. As such, it was impossible for the Future Rogue to not know how terrifying Aeconarolia was. He was the Dragon King who had slaughtered the entire dragon race. He was the black dragon who had destroyed an enormous country. He was the one who had brought the end of the world and the despair of an era, and this human had heavily injured him? So that's how it is. So that's how it is. The future Logue's gaze became empty as he laughed out loud. That's right. If he wasn't that strong, how could he single-handedly challenge 10,000 dragons? The future Logue still remembered that he had said this to Noah in the dragon graveyard. Your opponent is a giant dragon with 10,000 heads. You can't change the future with your power alone. The words from back then had now been rejected by Noah in the most direct and ironic manner. Only now did the future Logue understand. Noah Doria. This man wasn't someone that humans could compare to. Even in the face of everything in the world, it was difficult to find an existence that could be compared to him. Therefore, the future Logue laughed out loud. His laughter contained an indescribable sorrow. Unfortunately, at this moment, the existence of the future Logue was already insignificant to the two otherworldly figures present. Noah even withdrew the holy sword from the future Logue's throat and looked at Jerv. What are you doing here? Jerv smiled. His expression was still as harmless as ever. I'm here to witness the future of this era. Witness the future of this era? Noah furrowed his brows. What do you mean? Jerv didn't answer. Instead, he looked up and said, Don't worry. Akanalia, the Dragon King who was transformed from a human. Undoubtedly, he had the power to dominate the world, but he only wanted to destroy. His hatred for life led him to slaughter the entire dragon race back then, and treat the dragons as his targets. Jerv looked at Noah again. The smile on his face didn't change, but his eyes turned dark red. If Akanalia, who hates the dragon race, sensed the aura of so many dragons here, what would he do? Noah's heart skipped a beat when he heard Jerv's words. He lifted his head abruptly and looked at the sky. Roar, roar, roar! In the sky, a large number of dragons roared at the sky, and their roars resounded in the night sky. It was an abnormally majestic sight. However, Noah discovered it. The giant dragons that were attacking him fearlessly just a moment ago actually stopped in mid-air and roared threateningly in one direction. He looked like a wild beast that had instinctively sensed that a fatal disaster was approaching. Noah looked in the direction of the dragon's roars and gazed into the distant horizon. Not long after, a black figure appeared silently. Chapter 17:24. On the other side, when Noah was slaughtering the dragons, the magic shooters of the various guilds who were still in Colokas were also fighting against the dragons that were out of future Rogue's control. The location was in the central square of Colokas. When the entire Colokas turned into a sea of fire, only this square was still guarded. This was because the magic shooters from the various guilds in the kingdom were using this square as a base to fight against the attacking dragons. Roar! Accompanied by a series of roars, the three giant dragons surrounded the square in three directions and breathed out scorching hot breaths in the direction of the square. Roar of the fire dragon. Roar of the iron dragon. Roar of the sky dragon. Roar of the thunder dragon. Roar of the white dragon. Roar of the shadow dragon. Almost at the same time in the square, several breaths that contained different attributes also burst out. Flame breath from Naz. Steel breath from Gajalu. Hurricane breath from Wendy. It was the thunder breath of Raxus. It was Sting's holy breath. It was Logue's black shadow breath. A few breaths rose up in unison, clashing fearlessly with the incoming breath of the huge dragon. Boom! Several breaths collided with each other, entangling with each other. Then, in a simultaneous explosion, they exploded, setting off dense flames and shockwaves that shook the entire atmosphere. In the center of the square, the high mages from the various large guilds could only resist the berserk impact and the waves of fire while helplessly watching Naz and the other dragon-slaying high mages bitterly fighting the dragons. They could only stand there and feel anxious. It wasn't that the magic shooters from the various guilds didn't want to help, but they had already tested it before. Other than the dragon-slaying magic shooters, no one could cause damage to the dragons. Even Jula, who was ranked 5th among the top 10 saint magic shooters, couldn't do anything to those dragons. Therefore, everyone could only leave the battle to the dragon-slaying magic shooters. They gathered in the center of the square and were responsible for protecting those who were injured in the previous battle, as well as guild members who were too weak to protect themselves. Among them, Snow and Emerald were among them. Of course, Athena was there too. Lucy looked at Athena anxiously. Naz and his party were entangled with the three dragons and couldn't take them down for a long time. Instead, they were suppressed by the three dragons, and Lucy looked at Athena anxiously. "Hey, can't you think of something?" Lucy's words caused everyone to focus their attention on Athena. This was because not long ago, there weren't only 3 dragons here. Instead, there were more than a dozen dragons besieging this place. Being besieged by more than a dozen dragons, one could imagine how critical the situation was at that time. However, at that moment, Athena arrived with Yukino and Emerald. She instantly unleashed a dozen lightning bolts. Everyone saw with their own eyes that the lightning released by Athena easily killed the dragons, that the magic shooters from all over the kingdom couldn't even peel off a single scale with their combined power. At that time, everyone was stunned. However, before everyone could react, another 3 giant dragons descended from the sky and began to attack. This time, Athena didn't make a move and quietly stood aside, allowing Naz's party to fight. If Athena was willing to make a move, then the 3 dragons that were suppressing Naz's party would have died long ago. In this regard, Athena just calmly spoke. "I didn't receive any orders to destroy the dragons. Master's order to me was to protect your safety. If there is danger, I will make a move. But if there is no danger, then whether you fight or not is up to you. It has nothing to do with me." Hearing this, everyone became more anxious, but there was nothing they could do. What they didn't know was that Athena also had her own reasons for not making a move. Although she was sent by Noah to protect these people, Athena couldn't actually use her power. If she didn't obtain divine might from Noah, then Athena wouldn't be able to do anything at all. It was because of this that Athena tried her best to avoid making a move. "Even if my fated person has unlimited energy, if he keeps providing it to me, it may affect the part that he can use. Now, he is in the middle of a battle. If possible, I have to avoid using my power as much as possible." Athena glanced at Naz, Gadjaloo, Wendy, and the other Dragon Slayer Archmages with some interest in her eyes. Moreover, those Dragon Slayer Archmages are warriors with great potential, but they are still immature. If they can fight those dragons, it will be beneficial for them, right? As the goddess of war who had nurtured countless outstanding warriors, Athena was delighted to see them. Therefore, after 2 considerations, Athena was only responsible for holding the fort and didn't choose to make a move. However, something that even Athena didn't expect happened. Naz, Gadjaloo, Wendy, Sting and Logue, who were fighting the 3 dragons, suddenly stopped and froze in place. In the next second, the 5 of them knelt on the ground at the same time, holding their hearts and groaning in pain. Laxus, the only one who didn't have any abnormalities, was slightly shocked and shouted, "What's wrong with you?" Naz and the others ignored Laxus. They just held their hearts, their pupils dilated, and their breathing quickened. They knelt there with a depressed expression, gasping for breath. Naz, Gadjaloo, Wendy. The group of fairy tale archmages were shocked. Just as they were about to rush out, they were immediately stopped by Athena. "Don't go." Athena looked at Naz and the others with a coquettish glint in her eyes, and a look of surprise and doubt appeared on her young and pretty face. "There's another soul awakening in their bodies?" As soon as she said this, a strange phenomenon occurred. Roar, 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 a terrifying roar that was different from the other giant dragons and seemed to be able to shake people's souls resounded throughout the world, causing the world to suddenly tremble. Hearing this roar, everyone seemed to be stunned. They froze on the spot, and their eyes widened to the maximum. The main force members of Fairy Tail were stunned when they heard this roar, and cold sweat dripped down their faces. This was because the main force members had an impression of this voice. And this voice resounded, causing the pain on the faces of Naz, Gadjaloo, Wendy, Sting, and Roger to become even more intense. Their heartbeats also sped up, causing the clear sound of their heartbeats to shake from their bodies. Then, Athena raised her head, looked at the sky and whispered softly, "The evil aura is here." Hearing this, everyone present raised their heads and looked at the sky. They saw that in the night sky, in the thick clouds, a huge black shadow emerged from it, descending against the whistling wind. The pitch-black dragon wings shook the world. Its entire body was pitch black, and there were mysterious blue patterns everywhere. Its body carried a terrifying aura that separated the atmosphere. Its posture was like the embodiment of despair. The pitch-black Dragon King slowly descended from the clouds under everyone's sluggish gazes. Looking at the pitch-black dragon, Makarov's voice trembled as he squeezed out a voice with difficulty. Aeconarolia. As if it could hear Makarov's call, the descending Aeconarolia lowered its ferocious head and looked in the direction of the square. Looking at the three-headed dragon surrounding the square, Aeconarolia's eyes flashed with hostility. Not good. Athena was startled. It's planning to attack. Before she could say this sentence, in the sky, Aeconarolia suddenly opened its ferocious dragon mouth, and a terrifying light of destruction fluctuated from within. In the next moment, the light of destruction turned into a breath and fell from the sky, directly falling in the direction of the square. At this moment, no one in the square could move. Everyone could only stare blankly at the breath fluctuating with terrifying destructive energy descending from the sky, and in their hearts, despair gradually grew. Athena's pair of bewitching snake eyes flashed, and her body finally surged with phosphorescent divine power. Wang! At this time, a huge beam of light violently shot from another direction, rubbing against the air, flashing through space, and fiercely attacking the breath of destruction falling on the square. Boom! The two magic power beams collided in midair, stirring up surging waves of fire, setting off a violent impact, causing everyone in the square to be shaken to the ground, letting out mournful cries. The divine power on Athena's body suddenly stagnated, and a faint smile appeared on her tender face. You came? As soon as he finished speaking, a figure flew down from mid-air and landed in front of everyone. Raising his head and looking at the pitch-black dragon, Noah's eyes bloomed with a cold light. Chapter 1725. Noah. The group of fairy tales magic shooters were pleasantly surprised. Noah Dole. The sorcerers of the other guilds were also overjoyed. However, Noah didn't have the spare energy to care about the others. He only looked at the pitch-black Dragon King in the sky and tightened his grip on the holy sword. In the sky, Aeconarolia also saw Noah, who had suddenly stepped forward. To Aeconarolia, a human was just an ant, not worthy of his attention. Even dragons were prey to Aeconarolia, let alone humans who even dragons couldn't resist. Therefore, Aeconarolia definitely wouldn't look a human in the eye. However, at this very moment, Aeconaroglia was staring at Noah below. Aeconarolia clearly remembered that human's appearance. 7 years ago, on Heavenly Wolf Island, it was this human before his eyes who had stopped him when he was planning to destroy him, and even heavily injured him. It took Aeconaroglia several years to recover from his injuries. Taking a closer look, although the wounds inflicted by Noah's parting sword, EA, had already healed, there were still some scars left on Aeconarolia's pitch-black body that was covered with mysterious patterns. Recalling the pain he suffered at that time, Aeconarolia's eyes immediately turned red. Roar, 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 a roar that was enough to shake a person's soul resounded once again, turning into a rolling sound wave. With a shock, it actually dispersed the thick clouds in the night sky in an instant, setting off a violent airflow that surged in all directions. Immediately after, Aeconarolia, with a ruthless aura all over his body, charged towards the square below like an arrow that had been shot from a bow. The pitch-black giant rubbed against space, and it was like a meteorite falling from the sky. Sparks flew as it rubbed against the outline of Aeconarolia's body, shaking the entire space while explosively descending. Its momentum was extremely terrifying. Undoubtedly, Aeconarolia was still at least a few hundred meters in the air, but the violent airflow set off by his body had already reached the square, making the group of magic shooters unable to open their eyes. Such momentum was not something that the WYRMS summoned by the future Logue could compare to. The evidence was that the 3 dragons surrounding the square had already retreated with a low roar, their faces filled with fear. Noah was the only one present who could withstand the violent waves of air that were roaring towards him. His dark and deep eyes grew brighter and brighter. Then, Noah poured all the divine might he could into the demon slayer in his hands. Clang! A gorgeous white light shone, illuminating the entire square. At this moment, Noah gathered a portion of the divine might under his feet, before releasing it in one breath. Bang! The released divine might transformed into a powerful shockwave that shattered the ground. Shio! Immediately after, Noah's entire body shot towards the horizon at an astonishing speed, the demon slayer in his hands rising with a spiral-shaped phosphorescence. Absolute sword skill. Form 7 Dragon Bite. Dragon Bite. That was an absolute sword skill used in the air. When the opponent was in a high position, or even launched an attack while flying, this ultimate sword technique would negate the opponent's advantage of being in the air. Instead, it would absorb the inertia of the attack that was strengthened by gravity, turning the opponent's advantage into its own. Thus, Noah, who had soared into the sky, and Akenrolia, who had descended from the sky, fiercely collided in midair under everyone's gaze. Boom! An astonishing muffled sound resounded, shaking everyone's eardrums, making them raise their hands and cover their ears, letting out blood-curdling screams. And in midair, a shock wave shook like an explosion, spreading out in a ring shape, annihilating the sea of fire below. It was terrifyingly powerful. Noah and Akenrolia simultaneously flew out from that ring-shaped shockwave. One heavily fell on the ground, shattering it, while the other was shaken back to the sky with a sharp sound. He forcefully flapped his dragon wings, stopping with great difficulty. The head-on collision between a human and a dragon king ended in a draw. This result not only made the crowd of magic shooters shocked, but also made Akenrolia furious. Roar, roar! A terrifying roar full of anger resounded through the sky. With such anger, Akenrolia flapped his dragon wings and suddenly swooped down once again. Noah merely curled his lips in response, but there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. He once again stomped on the ground, turning it into a bullet that shot out of the barrel and shot into the sky. Suddenly, one human and one dragon turned into streaks of light, spiraling in the air like two thunderbolts, repeatedly colliding with each other. Boom, 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 boom. Heavy muffled sounds that stung people's eardrums kept echoing as Noah and Akenrolia collided with each other, creating terrifying shockwaves in midair that could be seen with the naked eye in all directions, making the space tremble. Such a shocking collision shocked all the magic shooters in the square. For a moment, they were completely unable to react. Only Emerald had a pleasantly surprised expression, as well as disbelief. That, sir, is actually so powerful? There was no doubt that it was a power that humans could not compare to. Everyone present, including Fei Chui, finally had a clear understanding of the extent of the power that Lin Fan possessed. This was especially true for the archmages of Saber-Tooth, who felt a burst of fear in their hearts. It turned out that they had always regarded such an existence as an enemy, or even as trash. Just how arrogant and conceited did one have to be to have such an understanding? With their hearts full of shock, the group of magic shooters could only foolishly look at the astonishing collision in the sky, not even knowing that their backs were soaked in sweat. In the end, it was the magic shooters of Fairy Tail who were the first to react. "Don't be in a daze there," Makarov shouted loudly. "Hurry up and see what's wrong with Naz and the others." Only then did everyone come to their senses. "Naz!" Habi flew to Naz's side, so anxious that tears came out of his eyes. "What's wrong with you?" "Ha! Ha!" Naz could not reply normally at all. He just clutched his heart and knelt on the ground, gasping for breath while squeezing out a voice with a face full of pain. I don't know either." All of a sudden, what happened? Gadgelu's face was also full of pain as he desperately gasped for breath. "My heart feels like it's about to explode." "Ugh!" Wendy groaned in extreme pain and spoke with difficulty. It seems like something is about to come out." Seeing Naz, Gadgelu, and Wendy kneeling there, clutching their hearts in pain, their breathing became more and more rapid. Even Sting and Roger were like this. Everyone was anxious. Thump, 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 thump. A very clear heartbeat sounded from the group of dragon-slaying magic shooters. Everyone could only watch this scene unfold at a loss, but there was nothing they could do to help. On the side, Athena had been staring at Naz and the others. The next second, Athena suddenly spoke. "It's coming." Everyone was stunned. Naz, Gadgelu, Wendy, Sting, Roger, and the others suddenly held their breaths. Ugh! Ugh! Suddenly, Naz and the others let out painful cries in unison. Amidst the cries, the five of them suddenly burst out with astonishing light, turning into a beam of light that rushed into the sky. Chapter 1726. Amidst the tremors in the air, The pillars of light that rose from Naz, Gadjaloo, Wendy, Justin, and Rog rushed directly into the sky, shining with a dazzling light that was particularly conspicuous in the dark night. What's going on? Everyone present was completely dumbfounded when they saw this scene. However, in the next moment, the scene in the light pillar caused their eyes to widen. Not to mention the others, even Naz, Gadjaloo, Wendy, Justin, and Rog's eyes widened. That's... Naz's face was full of shock. No way. Gadjaloo's eyes were full of shock. Liar. Wendy covered her mouth as tears began to well up in her eyes. Even Justin and Rog were in disbelief as if they couldn't believe their eyes, and their bodies began to tremble slightly. The tremors continued to sound in the air, causing the pillars of light that rose into the sky to begin to dim. However, as the pillars of light dimmed, the huge figures in the pillars of light slowly appeared under the night sky and were imprinted in everyone's eyes. They were actually dragons. They were dragons with completely different appearances. They were fire dragons that were red like flames and were extremely robust, with wisps of flames lingering around their bodies. They were iron dragons that seemed to be made of steel and were extremely smooth without any traces of scales. They looked like large reptiles covered in feathers, and even their wings were like those of birds. They were heavenly dragons made of feathers. They had dragon heads and antlers like the divine dragons of the East, and their bodies were sparkling and translucent like seawater. They were shadow dragons that were undulating with some black flame-like mist and had an extremely dense and profound feeling. These 5 dragons slowly emerged from the 5 pillars of light, flapping the dragon wings behind them, suspended in the air, and slowly opened their eyes. Looking at the 5 dragons, everyone present was in a daze. That was because the 5 dragons in front of them were completely different from the other dragons. Although everyone present could clearly sense the powerful aura and pressure from the 5 dragons, no one felt any danger from them. It wasn't that these dragons didn't have the ability to harm humans, but humans instinctively understood. These dragons wouldn't harm innocent lives. Naz, Gadjaloo, Wendy, Justin, and Rog trembled all over as they looked at the 5 dragons and clenched their fists. Naz stared at the leading fire dragon and said in a hoarse voice, "Igonial." Gadjaloo stared at the steel dragon, and his voice was full of disbelief. "Metallicana." Wendy stared at the heavenly dragon that was covered in feathers, and tears finally fell from her eyes. "Grandine." Justin and Rog looked at the remaining dragons and dragons respectively, and their lips trembled, but they still called out their names. Buzzlogia, Sheodora. Those names were all too familiar to the dragon-slaying archmages who were raised by dragons. That was because these names belonged to their parents. These dragons in front of them were the parents of Naz, Gadjaloo, Wendy, Justin, and Rog. Although they were dragons, they loved humans deeply. They raised Naz and the others, who were humans, and taught them dragon-slaying magic. However, they disappeared at one point, causing Naz and the others to bitterly search for their parents for several years. Under the incredulous gazes of Naz and the others, the 5 dragons lowered their heads and looked at their children with an unimaginable gentleness in their eyes. The leader, Igonial, spoke in a loud voice. "Long time no see, Naz." "Ignir." Naz couldn't help but stand up. He couldn't take his eyes off Ignir at all. He moved his legs and walked towards Ignir step by step. "Is it really Igonial? You don't even recognize your own father?" The corners of Igonial's mouth curled up, but that curl quickly disappeared. He shifted his gaze to the sky in front of him and snorted coldly. However, now is not the time to reminisce. "Naz, get out of the way." That one sentence dispelled all the excitement and emotions in Naz's heart. "Bastard!" Naz shouted angrily at Igonial, who was in the sky. "What do you mean by get out of the way?" "You're so noisy, Naz." "Shut your mouth." Igonial ignored Naz and looked ahead with narrowed eyes. "What's next is a battle between dragons. You can't interfere now, so just watch quietly from the side." A battle between dragons? Naz was stunned. At this time, everyone present suddenly realized. In front of Igonial and the others, a group of black shadows was approaching at an extremely fast speed. Looking at that group of black shadows, everyone's heads began to feel numb. The reason for that was because each and every one of those silhouettes was an enormous dragon. A group of countless dragons surged toward them like a tidal wave, bringing with them an unimaginable sense of oppression. However, in the face of that terrifying oppression, Igoniel snorted disdainfully. He flapped the dragon wings on his back and roared at the sky. I am the Fire Dragon King Igoniel. Dragons! If you want to challenge my dignity, then come at me. This roar turned into a rolling sound wave that resounded through the night sky like thunder. That roar made the magic shooters on the ground wail for the umpteenth time. However, at the same time, it also stopped the overwhelming swarm of WYRMS from surging forward. The WYRMS stopped in front of Ignir, Metallicana, Grandini, Boslosaya, and Shigiadora, flapping their wings and letting out deafening roars. Obviously, the name of the Fire Dragon King was definitely a well-known name for the dragons. Otherwise, there would be no way to deter so many dragons at once. Dragons! Go back! Grandini also spoke, but her voice was not as heavy as Igoniel's. Instead, it was as gentle as an old woman's. The current era does not belong to us dragons. Invading this era is not allowed. Go back to the era that belongs to you. Hearing that, many dragons in the group let out roars of disagreement, disapproval, and even disdain. They did not pay attention to Grandini's words at all. However, not all dragons were like that. Some of the dragons looked at each other in confusion, as if they did not know what to do. Some of the dragons retreated without hesitation, and even went behind Igoniel and roared at the original group of dragons. The former were intimidated by the name of the Fire Dragon King, and did not know if they should retreat. The latter were all dragons of the Fire Dragon clan, and treated the words of the Fire Dragon King Igoniel as an order. Hence, the dragons that had brought disaster to the entire Crocus were divided into 3 factions. One was led by Igoniel, Metallicana, Grandini, Boslosaya, and Shigiadola. One was intimidated by the might of the Fire Dragon King and the other dragons, and chose to watch from the sidelines. Another one roared bravely at Igoniel and his group, and issued a challenge, charging in their direction. Igoniel spat out a stream of flames from his nose, but a sinister smile appeared on his dragon head. I'm burning. Immediately, the dragons in the sky above Crocus began to roar and collide, and an intense group battle broke out in mid-air. The battle between humans and dragons had unknowingly turned into a battle between dragons and dragons. On the other hand, the humans could only stay on the ground and watch this scene in a daze, completely at a loss for what to do. Under such circumstances, in the sky, at a place higher than the clashing dragons, the most intense battle was also going on. However, that battle was no longer a battle between dragons, but a battle between humans and dragons. There was only one person who was watching the battle. That was the dark magic shooter who stood at the top of the palace, facing the wind. Looking at the sky that had turned into a battlefield, Jerf murmured softly. If you can defeat Akanalia, then you can definitely help me fulfill my wish. Definitely. Chapter 17:27. Bang! In the distant horizon, the 2 streaks of light collided with each other heavily. After a heavy muffled sound and violent wind, the 2 streaks of light trembled and were sent flying backwards. Under the shock of the ring-shaped shock wave, the 2 streaks of light retreated violently. Roar! Akanarolia roared furiously. The dragon wings on its back flapped, and its huge body that was sent flying backwards came to a stop. It stabilized its body, and then transformed into a meteorite for the umpteenth time, shooting forward. That speed made the Black Dragon King like a bullet. In an instant, it arrived in front of Noah, who was still retreating, with a ruthless and ominous glint in its eyes. Hoo! Accompanied by a whistling sound, the halberd-like dragon tail on Akonarolia's back swung fiercely in the direction of Noah. Wherever the black dragon tail passed, the air was compressed into a ball and suddenly exploded, forming a very ear-piercing sonic boom. Under that ear-piercing sonic boom, the black dragon tail, which carried an extremely terrifying power, swept across the space and violently whipped towards Noah. With such a powerful blow, it was impossible for Noah, who possessed superb senses, to not detect it. However, Noah did not show any fear, nor did he stop. Instead, he gathered divine power under his feet and suddenly released it. With a dong sound, as if he had stepped on the air, he turned into a cannonball and retreated at an even faster speed. Swish! The dragon tail, which carried a terrifying power, suddenly fell into the air, setting off a wave of air and even causing a burst of air. It was quite terrifying. One could well imagine how frightening the damage would be if that strike were to land on a person's body. Unfortunately, no matter how strong he was, if he couldn't hit him, then it would be completely useless. Noah, who had casually avoided that frightening blow, had a sharp glint in his eyes. He still did not stop his body, but converted the divine power flowing in his body into demonic power. Clang! Without the support of the divine power, the light on the demon slayer in Noah's hand suddenly dimmed. However, a violent demonic power suddenly rose from Noah's body. Bas! In the next moment, huge magic squares rotated in front of Noah one after another, overlapping and combining. In an instant, they formed an extremely abstruse and complex geometric pattern. Then, waves of berserk magic power rapidly condensed into streams and poured into the extremely complex geometric magic array, causing the complex geometric magic array to expand continuously. In just a moment, the complex geometric magic square had expanded to a size of hundreds of meters in diameter, with dazzling demonic power flickering inside. Only then did Noah reach out his hand and placed it at the center of the complex geometric magic square that was like a huge turret, and whispered, "Cast." The massive amount of demonic power that was gathered within the magic square exploded instantly. Bang! In the next moment, in the sound of heavy artillery, an earth-shattering magic beam burst out from the huge geometrical magic array, and with a sharp whistling sound, it shot straight towards Econarolia. Looking at the huge beam of demonic power shooting towards him, a faint sense of crisis emerged in Econalia's heart. Therefore, Econalia had reason to believe that his dragon scales that could resist any kind of magic attack, and even physical attack, would not be able to completely offset the might of the huge beam of demonic power. Roar! Thus, Econalia suddenly roared and opened his sinister dragon mouth, gathering demonic power that fluctuated with frightening destructive energy and condensing it into a ball of light. Bang! The ball of light exploded, and the fearsome destructive energy transformed into a beam of light that pierced through the air and shook heaven and earth. The beam of light was imbued with a burst of abnormal energy fluctuations, and it hurtled directly toward the oncoming beam of light. Boom! The moment the two terrifying beams of light collided, a ball-shaped ball of demonic power continuously expanded at the point of collision. Finally, it exploded with a loud bang, causing the violent explosion to turn into a shockwave that shook in all directions. The thunderous sound could be faintly heard even from a distance of 1,000 meters. At the moment of the explosion, a circle of energy ripples also shook from the point of explosion, sending Econalia flying back. It was at this moment that a figure suddenly appeared in the center of the energy ripples in front of them. With a whoosh, the figure landed on Econarolia's back. Econalia's eyes widened. Noah, on the other hand, raised his fist high. Magic lines that looked like electric wires suddenly crawled up his arm. "Go down!" Amidst the violent roar, Noah's fist that was covered with electric wiring lines suddenly clenched, and like a thunderclap, it fiercely smashed down on Econalia's body. Boom! A muffled sound like the ringing of a bell resounded, shaking up a circle of shockwaves. An astonishing force directly hit Econarolia's back, causing him to let out a painful howl. His huge body was like a kite with a broken string, and like a rubber ball that was fiercely slapped away. He fiercely fell to the ground. Whoosh! A sharp sound that pierced one's eardrums reverberated between heaven and earth, attracting the attention of the fierce battle between the dragons and the humans who were watching the development of the situation on the ground. Then both the humans and the dragons saw it. In the distant sky, a stream of light violently fell like a meteorite, causing violent friction with the atmosphere. Carrying a fiery halo, it heavily landed in a corner of Crocus under the gaze of all the dragons and humans. Boom! The stream of light hit the ground, and amidst a deafening loud noise, it stirred up a terrifying shockwave. Along the way, it brought along thick sand and debris, spreading to the surroundings like a typhoon. Looking at this scene, both the dragons and humans subconsciously stopped what they were doing and focused their gazes there. After the astonishing shockwave subsided, everyone could see clearly. In that huge pit, Econalia was lying on it, howling in pain. On the other hand, Noah rode on Econalia's back. His hands were covered in electric wiring lines that shone with unprecedented brilliance. He threw punches at Econalia one after another. Boom, 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 boom. A series of muffled sounds that made one's heart contract abruptly resounded. At this moment, Noah seemed to have turned into a berserker. With red eyes, He repeatedly bombarded Echinalia with fists that carried the power of tens of thousands of kilograms. With each punch, Echinaolia's huge dragon body shook fiercely, and it let out a painful roar. Immediately, even the ground started to crack apart along Echinaroglia's body in all directions. That extremely shocking scene made all the dragons and humans suck in a breath of cold air. Finally, even the ground couldn't withstand the shaking of those punches that could shatter mountains and split the sea. Bang! With a muffled explosion, the ground beneath Echinarolia shattered and caved in as if it was collapsing. Dense sand and dust filled the air, covering Echinalia's body. At this time, Noah suddenly retreated from that dense sand and landed on the ground. The magic patterns on his arms slowly disappeared, and he raised his hand. The silver holy sword just happened to fall from the sky, landing in Noah's hand. Everyone suddenly went silent. The eyes of the entire Crocus were focused on Noah. Looking at the figure that was much smaller than the dragons, a feeling of alarm arose in their hearts. I didn't expect that such a terrifying human could be born in this era. Igunir stared at Noah, then looked in the direction of the rising sand and dust. However, Echinalia isn't that easy to defeat, human. Chapter 17:28. In the sky, the sound of dragons flapping their wings could still be heard clearly, filling the whole of Kaloches with a tense atmosphere. Everyone's eyes were focused on the place where the thick dust was rising, and then looked at Noah, who was motionless, and many people couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Under such circumstances, in the place where the thick dust was rising, a black shadow gradually climbed up from the ground, and the dragon wings on its back suddenly shook, shaking the thick dust away. Roar, 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 roar. The black dragon king, covered in mysterious patterns, looked up to the sky and roared, making everyone present feel as if they had been hit by an invisible impact. Their chests felt stuffy, and they couldn't help but retreat a little. Noah looked straight at the angry roaring Echinarolia. His hand holding his sword slightly tightened, and an expression of as expected appeared on his face. Even if it's just a god-level physical ability, there's still no way to cause much damage to it? No matter what, Echinarolia was a 4-digit existence. Noah's physical ability that was comparable to a god-level physical ability after being strengthened by magic was at best a 5-digit peak. If he wanted to shake Echinarolia, there was no way to cause much damage with just an attack of that level. Of course, even if it didn't cause much damage, from a human point of view, Noah's actions were already quite astonishing to be able to suppress the legendary Dragon King and beat it up. It was precisely because of this that the anger in Echinarolia's heart could be imagined. So in the next second, Echinarolia lowered its head, stared at Noah, opened its dragon mouth, and squeezed out a low voice. How irritating! That voice stunned all the people and dragons present. However, even if everyone and the dragons were stunned, Echinarolia still growled as if it was talking to itself. To think that I would be forced into such a state by a mere human. This is too displeasing. Hearing this, everyone finally reacted. Wendy said with a look of bewilderment. He spoke. Isn't that obvious? Gadjaloo clicked his tongue. Dragons are extremely intelligent beings. How could they not know how to speak? As Gadjaloo had said, dragons were highly intelligent beings. It was impossible for them not to know how to speak. Not to mention, Echinarolia was once a human, so it was even more impossible for him to not know how to speak. However, generally speaking, some proud and arrogant dragons, who viewed humans as ants, food and livestock, did not like to talk to humans. That was why they would use roars as a form of intimidation instead of words. Echinarolia was an existence that belonged to this category. It wasn't just humans. Echinarolia also despised the dragon race, and even despised all life forms. Even if he had extremely high intelligence, he still didn't like to talk to any existence. However, at this moment, Echinarolia finally opened his mouth to speak. Because of a human. A human who had once severely injured him and now suppressed him. Raising a ferocious dragon claw and slamming it on the ground, Echinarolia spat out words full of anger and hostility in Noah's direction. I will destroy you. Destroy you. Human. Hearing this, before Noah could say anything, Igunal descended from the sky and arrived above Noah's head. You were once a human, Dragon King. Igunal's pair of flame-like eyes stared at Echinarolia as he growled at him. This era no longer belongs to the dragons. The birth of a human who can rival you is proof that even you are no longer the overlord of this era. Don't interfere with the direction of this era. Econarolia. Econarolia immediately raised his dragon head and looked at Agunal, his voice still low and angry. Do you think I will lose to a mere human? Fire Dragon King. You were once a human, yet you were able to become the Dragon King. If that's the case, is there anything strange about the appearance of another human who can defeat you? Igunir said as he spat out a mouthful of flames. The era of the dragons has already ended. Your legend will also end one day. I, Fire Dragon King Agunal, firmly believe that this day will come. That is why I continue to live and wait for this day to come. That kind of thing doesn't matter. Econarolia roared, creating an astonishing sound wave. My wish is only destruction. 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 Your wish will not come true. Econarolia. Igunal was not to be outdone as he roared at Econarolia. His roar created wind waves that surged in all directions. I will stop you. Humans will also stop you. No matter if you are a human or a dragon, you are also unpleasant. Econarolia's surging gaze swept across the surrounding dragons as he growled. I will destroy all of you. Not a single one will be left alive. Econarolia's words angered all the dragons. However, from Econarolia's body, the dragons all felt a fatal threat. This kind of threat suppressed the anger of the giant dragons and prevented them from recklessly charging forward. Thanks to this, the dragons were able to survive. Econarolia no longer paid attention to the dragons and turned his gaze back to Noah. Then, Econarolia's body flashed with a pitch-black radiance. Clang! In that pitch-black radiance, Econarolia's huge body gradually shrank. Seeing this, Noah's eyes flashed with astonishment. What was even more astonishing was yet to come. As Econarolia gradually shrank, the outline of his body changed from a dragon form to a human form. Finally, when the magic light enveloping Econarolia's body faded, a figure was imprinted in everyone's eyes. It was a man with dark skin that was covered with patterns. The man had messy long hair draped to his waist and a black cloak draped over his body. His upper body was naked, but there were scars and a dragon tooth necklace hung around his neck. At first glance, he looked like a wanderer. However, there was a destructive aura fluctuating from this wanderer, as well as an extremely dangerous temperament. Especially in the man's eyes, there was not the slightest trace of emotion. There was only a scalp-numbing vicious aura and an endless desire to destroy. Looking at this person, everyone and the dragons lost their voices. Noah looked at him and softly muttered. So that's how it is. Is this your human form? Econarolia, who had transformed into a human form, did not reply. Instead, he stared at Noah, his eyes fluctuating with vicious aura as he stretched out his hand and pointed at the scars on his body. These scars were all caused by the sword strike you dealt to me 7 years ago. That one sentence silenced everyone, including the dragon. Everyone and the dragons looked at the hideous scars all over Econarolia's body and shuddered in their hearts. What kind of sword strike could cause such injuries? Even the main members of Fairy Tale shuddered when they recalled Noah's sword that could split the heavens and earth. In this situation, Noah narrowed his eyes and said this sentence. It would be better to say that after taking that kind of strike, you only receive such a degree of injury. That's what makes me surprised. Is that so? Econarolia expressionlessly said. However, after this wound appeared, every time it hurts, a thought in my heart becomes stronger. As he spoke these words, an extremely dark and overbearing demonic energy suddenly erupted from Econarolia's body, transforming into a gale that swept outwards. That is, if you don't die, no matter where you are, even if you are at the end of this era, I will chase after you and tear you to pieces. After saying this, Econarolia's hand under his cloak suddenly clenched into a claw. With a wave of his claw, several pitch-black claw lights suddenly appeared. Like blade lights, they violently chopped towards Noah. Chapter 17:29. Following the sharp sound of something breaking through the air, that pitch-black sharp claw light suddenly cut through the air like a bolt of lightning, carrying a ferocious aura that caused one's expression to change as it viciously chopped down at Noah. That claw light was like the sharpest cutting machine in the world, suffused with a cold and dark aura, causing one's scalp to begin to tingle. It was believed that if one was hit by this claw light, then it would definitely be like what Econarolia said, being able to tear a person to pieces in an instant. Even if that person was Noah, it would still be the same. However, facing such a terrifying attack, Noah's expression did not change in the slightest. Looking at the sharp claw light that violently chopped down, Noah felt the cold aura that it carried until it was less than half a meter away from his body. Only then did he tighten his foot and abruptly take a step to the side. Shwa! The sharp claw light immediately brushed past Noah's shoulder in an extremely thrilling manner, landing on the ground beside Noah. Pang! In the midst of the explosive sound, those sharp claw light directly exploded the ground, carving out several gullies in the ground, and explosively shot into the distance without losing momentum, plowing out abyss-like cracks along the way, causing gravel to fly in all directions and explode in the surroundings. The power of a single claw had actually reached such a level. And this claw was clearly just a greeting from Econarolia. Pang! In the next second, Econarolia stomped on the ground, and his entire body shot out like a sharp arrow. His eyes filled with hostility stared straight at Noah, while one of his hands was still in the shape of a claw, like a sharp beast's claw. Raising his arm, the claw brought about a cold and sharp wind as it mercilessly pierced towards Noah's throat. Only at this time did the onlookers and dragons react one after another. Looking at Econarolia shooting towards Noah at an astonishing speed, the sharp claw directly piercing towards Noah's throat, one by one they cried out in alarm. Even the ground had been ripped apart by Econarolia's claw, not to mention a human's body, and a fragile throat at that? Everyone could be sure. Once this claw hit, not to mention the throat, Noah's entire head would be directly torn apart, leaving only a pile of blood and flesh. Even the onlookers could understand. Naturally, Noah could not. In response, Noah suddenly raised the Demon Slayer in his hand. Clang! A surge of divine power surged into the silver holy sword, causing the elven magic equipment named Demon Slayer to blossom with dazzling light. Soon after, Noah raised the holy sword in his hand high up, and suddenly chopped down at the incoming sharp claw. The sword light fell in midair, colliding with the incoming claw with a loud bang. Clang! The collision of the sword and the claw actually caused a crisp sound of steel clashing against steel to suddenly resound, stirring up ripples in the air, which rapidly surged out in all directions, spreading out in all directions. Noah and Econarolia both trembled, and under the effect of a force that could not be ignored, they were suddenly shaken back. Suddenly, Econaraglia's feet repeatedly stomped on the ground, and his figure involuntarily retreated. With every step he took, the ground would shatter with a thump sound. After retreating several steps in a row, Econarolia fiercely stomped his feet, and at the same time, his figure finally stabilized. Noah was not as violent as Econarolia. While retreating, his feet gracefully tapped on the ground, and with each leap, he dispelled the force that could not be ignored. Launching an attack without a word, as expected of a villain. Noah's gaze directly fell on Econarolia's body, and a slight sharpness gradually emerged in his eyes. Then, should it be my turn next? As his words fell, the phosphorescent divine power fluctuating around Noah's body suddenly surged to his feet, converged into a ball, and then exploded. Noah's figure suddenly burst out, and with a low thunder-like sound, the holy sword in his hand pointed at Econarolia from afar, and like a bolt of lightning, shot out. Absolute sword skill. Primary form purple lightning. The lightning-like thrust caused Noah's figure to turn into a blurry shadow, and in a flash, he arrived in front of Econarolia. The sharp tip of his sword was directly pointed at Econarolia's throat, as if returning the attack from before. With a cold gust of wind, he mercilessly stabbed forward. Econarolia's pupils slightly shrank, but a ruthless look appeared in his eyes, and he suddenly bent his claws. A pitch-black demonic power suddenly emerged from Econarolia's claws, curling around his 5 fingers, and slightly fluctuating, causing Econarolia's nails to be suffused with a cold light. Black Dragon's Claw Attack. With a low roar, Econarolia's arm shook, and his claws instantly shot out. An invisible gust of wind formed a faintly discernible shadow in front of his claws, and like a dragon's claw, it carried a ferocious momentum and met the holy sword that was thrusting towards him. Clang! A loud and clear sound of metal clashing abruptly rang out. Wang! A storm-like ripple of energy suddenly burst out from the collision of the sword and the claw. Kacha kacha kacha! Wherever the ripple of energy passed, the ground was unable to bear the heavy load, and cracks spread out like a spider web from Noah and Econorolia's bodies, instantly expanding to a distance of tens of meters away. Under such circumstances, the invisible ripple of energy was still constantly shaking out from the collision of the sword and the claw, causing the ground to continuously crack. In the blink of an eye, the cracks on the ground had reached their limit, and the whole ground suddenly collapsed. The onlookers and the dragons all subconsciously retreated. Looking at the two people in the collision, they unconsciously broke out in a cold sweat. A collision of that degree, let alone a human, even an ordinary dragon would not be able to cause it, right? Two existences that were essentially human could actually fight to this extent? Just how much potential did the human race have? Econorolia, who did not know what the dragons were thinking, only felt his arm go numb. That holy sword flickering with dazzling white light carried a powerful energy fluctuation, continuously attacking his body, causing his chest to begin to feel stuffy. Then, Econorolia discovered his body's ability was actually fading little by little. The so-called dragon-slaying magic was a magic that could give a high mage a physique comparable to a dragon's, a magic that could destroy a dragon's power. Using this kind of magic, Econorolia could slaughter a group of dragons and become the Dragon King. Now the elven magic device called Demon Slayer was slowly eliminating the effects of the dragon-slaying magic used by Econorolia, attempting to pull Econorolia off the altar of the Dragon King and turn him back into a human. That was the ability of the Demon Slayer. It was even more against the rules than the God Slayer magic device, and could even break through curses. Being in close contact with this kind of elven magic device, Econorolia's dragon physique would most likely be removed and he would turn back into a human. This was something that Econorolia could not tolerate. "I'm the Dragon King. Econorolia." Econorolia clenched his claws, tightly grasping the dazzling white light of the Demon Slayer. Staring at Noah with an ominous glint in his eyes, he growled, "Before destroying everything in this era, I absolutely won't lose to a human." As soon as his voice fell, Econorolia suddenly raised his other arm, curling it into a claw. Pitch-black magic surged on it, turning into a sinister beast claw, covering Econorolia's claw. Whoosh! Amidst the faint sound of breaking air, the claw that was covered by the ferocious beast's claws cut through the air. It carried an incomparably sharp claw wind and terrifying chi as it violently slashed at Noah's chest. Noah's expression slightly changed. Chapter 1730. Sharp claws swept past, carrying a sinister dragon claw shadow, leaving faint claw marks in the air, directly aiming for Noah's chest. In Noah's eyes, the sharp claws gradually enlarged, as though they were announcing the arrival of death. They were closing in on Noah bit by bit. In this instant, Noah could be said to have reached the end of the road. The demon slayer in his hand was firmly imprisoned by Econolia, not caring about the effects on his body, simply unable to move. In this case, with Noah's body that had returned to the human category after losing his ability value, he would definitely die on the spot after receiving that claw. But at this time, if the divine power in his body was converted into magic power, using the strengthening magic to strengthen his body, perhaps he would be able to withstand this attack. However, at that moment, Econorolia's claw collided with the demon slayer, and directly suppressed Aster, who had lost the support of his divine power, and similarly dealt a fatal blow to Noah. Of course, Noah could also use both magic power and divine power at the same time, achieving the dual use of both the elven device and the strengthening magic. But before this, Noah had already discovered that the difficulty of controlling two completely different types of energy was a lot higher than purely controlling one type of energy. If he used both types of energy at the same time, it would only cause the output of the two types of energy to decrease by a lot, causing the might of both the elven device and the strengthening magic to sharply decrease by more than half. In this way, he simply wouldn't be able to continue fighting Econolia. Thus, in the battle between Noah and Econolia, he had always only used divine power or magic power, absolutely not both at the same time. In any case, Econolia's dragon physique completely came from the dragon slayer magic. As long as he had the demon slayer in hand, then even if Noah didn't use the strengthening magic to strengthen his body's ability would still be in the human realm. He could rely on the elven device to greatly weaken the might of Econolia's dragon slayer magic, achieving the goal of directly confronting this pitch-black dragon king. In view of this, now that the demon slayer was imprisoned, facing Econolia's furious claw, Noah had already reached the end of the road. Then, at this very moment, what other methods did Noah have to deal with the current situation? The three major spells of the fairy tale required an extremely long time to prepare, and simply couldn't be used in this moment of imminent peril. None of the simulated star map, another cosmology, was effective against Econololia. In that case, in a situation where he could only use the divine might, there was only one trump card that Noah could use. Divine starlight, lightning of salvation, wisdom of the goddess, indestructible steel. Amidst the incantation written in the elven language, half of the elven mark on the back of Noah's left hand suddenly flickered. Sword appear in my hand. Suddenly Athena, who was standing by the side of the high mages of the fairy tale, had a pair of bewitching snake eyes that faintly flickered, and the corners of her mouth lifted slightly. Soon after, under the astonished gazes of the high mages of the fairy tale, Athena's body flashed with a resplendent radiance and turned into a platinum divine sword. She suddenly turned, broke through the air, and shot towards Noah's direction. Pa! With a crisp sound, the elven device called the Heavenly Sword of Salvation was caught in Noah's hand. Clang! A dazzling platinum light that was as bright as the sun suddenly blossomed from the Heavenly Sword of Salvation. The platinum light converged into a flash of light in the blink of an eye. Amidst Econorolia's abrupt change of expression, it suddenly shot out and shot towards Econorolia's sharp claws. In order to imprison the demon slayer, Econorolia directly used his hand to tightly grasp the demon slayer. Thus, under the power of the demon slayer, Econorolia's dragon slayer magic had been weakened by a large portion. What would be the result of using such a weakened dragon slayer magic to face a flash that could split stars? The answer was mercilessly revealed in the next second. Poochie! The resplendent flash burst out, and with a tearing sound, it directly pierced through Econorolia's arm and even annihilated that arm in the flash. Thick blood immediately sprayed into the sky. Woo! Woo ha ha ha! Econorolia let out a low roar filled with pain. Under the intense pain, Econorolia released the demon slayer's shackles. Noah's eyes flashed with a touch of coldness, and he raised the demon slayer high. Clang! The silver sword light flashed, and with a sword hum, it suddenly swept down towards Econorolia. Poochie! Another tearing sound sounded, and a large amount of dark red blood sprayed in all directions. The demon slayer, which turned into a sword light, slashed diagonally along Econorolia's shoulder, causing blood to spurt out from Econorolia's body. A hideous wound appeared on Econorolia's body from his left shoulder to the right side of his abdomen. With a large amount of blood, Econorolia's body soared into the air, flew backwards, and slowly fell to the ground. Blood dyed the ground red. The whole world fell into silence. Everyone looked at Econorolia, who fell to the ground, with a large amount of blood flowing out from his body and staining the ground red. They all fell into a state of silence, including the dragons in the sky. Whether it was humans or dragons, at this moment, they all held their breath and lost the ability to speak and react. Then on the ground dyed red, Econorolia's body trembled and he coughed. Cough, cough, cough. Econorolia constantly coughed out blood, but as if he didn't allow himself to lie on the ground, he struggled to get up. However, the entire process of getting up was difficult and cruel. Naturally, it was difficult to avoid. After all, even if it was a dragon king, receiving such a serious injury was enough to kill him. Thus, how could it not be difficult to get up? As for cruelty, it referred to the scene itself. Even after suffering such a serious injury, he still insisted on getting up. During the whole process, blood spilled out from Econorolia's severed arm and the wound in front of his body as if it was free, dyeing the ground into a pool of blood. However, even so, Econorolia still insisted on getting up. After standing up with great difficulty, his body was crooked, as if he could fall down at any time. That scene could be described as tragic. Noah quietly watched this scene unfold. He didn't stop it, didn't say anything, and didn't pursue the victory. Instead, as if talking to himself, he softly said. At the last moment, he desperately jumped back a step? That's right. The moment the demon slayer slashed down, Econorolia jumped back a step, avoiding the result of being cut in half by the demon slayer. But you already have no chance of winning. Noah looked straight at Econorolia and said indifferently. It ends here. Econorolia. Hearing Noah's words, regardless of the reactions of the spectators and dragons, Econorolia trembled heavily and slowly raised his head. It ends here? Econarolia coldly looked at Noah, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth, but he didn't care and growled. No. Until the moment of my life ends. I won't stop my destruction. 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 Econarolia roared towards the sky. I want to destroy. With a roar, Econarolia raised his remaining hand and formed a claw. Ignoring the large amount of blood that flowed out, he charged in Noah's direction. Looking at Econarolia who was charging towards him, Noah's eyes flickered. Before a feeling of pity emerged in his eyes, he closed his eyes. However, in Noah's hand, the elven magic device named Heavenly Sword of Salvation once again blossomed with a dazzling brilliance. The brilliance turned into streaks of platinum light. Like a laser, they suddenly shot out and directly shot towards Econarolia. Poochie poochie poochie. One after another, the streaks of light pierced through Econarolia's body and came out from his back. Without losing momentum, they shot into the distance and disappeared on the other side of the horizon. Chapter 1731. Bang! With a clear sound of falling to the ground, Econarolia, whose body was pierced by the light of salvation, slowly fell to the ground. The blood flowing out of his body had already stopped. Looking at the night sky dyed red by the flames, Econarolia's eyes filled with hostility became absent-minded little by little. His vision began to distort. His heart gradually stopped beating. At this moment, Econarolia clearly understood one thing. His destructive journey that had lasted for hundreds of years had finally come to an end. Not long after, the existence called Econarolia would completely disappear from this world. Just like what Igunal said. The era belonging to the Dragon King had impressively come to an end. Regarding this, Econarolia didn't feel sad, nor did he feel unwilling, nor did he have the slightest resentment. There was only a tranquility that mortals couldn't understand. When he was still a human, Econarolia was an existence with distorted emotions. When others were enjoying life, Econarolia was thinking about destruction. When others were struggling under the threat of the dragons, Econarolia was thinking about destruction. When others were making an alliance with the dragons of the coexistence faction to resist the dragons of the opposition, Econarolia was thinking about destruction. When others were slowly approaching death with the passage of time, Econarolia was also thinking about destruction. Jerv once said that Econarolia undoubtedly had the power to dominate the world, but he only thought about destruction. This sentence could be said to have completely interpreted the essence of Econarolia's existence. Jerv was right. Econarolia was synonymous with destruction. Even if he looked down on humans, was hostile to the dragons, and even hated all life, it was all because Econarolia wanted to enjoy destruction. It was that simple. If in the world of Hakata, Az-Dakaha was the embodiment of evil, then Econarolia was the embodiment of destruction. The difference was that the former's evil was to create a future for humans, while the latter's destruction was just a manifestation of distorted emotions. In any case, Econarolia's journey of destruction had come to an end. It was said that before a person died, they would recall everything that had happened during their lifetime. However, Econarolia didn't have that kind of emotion. He just calmly closed his eyes. The moment his heart stopped beating, he welcomed death in the most calm manner. Just like this, Econarolia's aura completely disappeared. Everyone present, including Long June, looked at Econarolia who was lying on the ground with his eyes closed. From beginning to end, there was no expression on his face, and they looked at each other in dismay. In the next second, astonishing cheers soared into the sky, carrying the joy of the people, resounding through the night sky. Econarolia's death had caused everyone here to forget about him. It wasn't only Econarolia that threatened this world, but also the dragons flapping their wings in the sky. People hugged each other to celebrate this miraculous victory. Some of them even shed tears of joy. When the dragons descended, these high mages from famous guilds all over the kingdom experienced only infinite panic. When Econarolia descended, everyone present felt a deep sense of despair. However, the despair that the humans could not resist had finally fallen in front of everyone. He was single-handedly defeated by that existence called Noah Doria with 2 swords. Many people looked at the figure holding the silver holy sword and the platinum divine saber, standing in the sea of flames. Reverence and admiration appeared in their eyes, as well as longing and worship. Even Egoniel, Grandine, Metallicana, Boslosaya, and Shigiadora, who were soaring in the sky, were looking at Noah, who was standing on the ground, with endless emotions surging in their hearts. "There's no need to doubt it," Ignir said in a low voice. "This era belongs to the human race. That man proved it." "That's right," Grandine said in an extremely gentle voice. "The era of us dragons has come to an end." Metallicana, Boslosaya, and Shigiadora slowly nodded. Their hearts were actually the same as Econorolia's. There was no sadness, no unwillingness, let alone resentment. There was only inconceivable calmness. Perhaps, this was the state of mind that a transcendent of this era should have? With such a state of mind, Ignir turned his head and looked at the dragons in the sky. His voice resounded through the night sky. "Dragons! Go back. Go back to your era. There's no meaning in fighting. Strife shouldn't happen here. Our world doesn't belong here. It belongs to 400 years ago. Go back. Return this era to humans." These words reverberated in the sky for a long time without calming down. Hearing these words, the dragons were no longer as agitated as before. Instead, they looked at each other, then at Noah, who was standing on the ground with two swords in his hands. Undoubtedly, he was quite small, but he gave off a feeling of vastness that no matter what, they couldn't match. They fell into silence. Finally, the dragons raised their heads and roared at the sky. Roar, roar, roar. The roars of the dragons turned into vibrating echoes that rippled under the night sky and spread to the horizon. Immediately, the dragons flapped their wings and flew in the direction of the eclipse gate in groups. When the crowd saw this, they cried tears of joy and cheered once again. Emerald's eyes were also glistening with tears. She watched the dragons disappear in the direction of the eclipse gate with mixed feelings as she softly muttered, "It's over." This sentence was quickly drowned out by the cheers of everyone present. However, Noah heard this sentence in disbelief. He looked at Econorolia's corpse in front of him, lowered his head, and muttered to himself, "Is it over?" As he said this, another figure appeared in Noah's mind. Immediately, Noah's eyes flickered. "No, it's not over yet." When this sentence came out of Noah's mouth, the flow of air suddenly changed. "One." Amidst a tremor that no one could hear, the entire space suddenly trembled. Then, with Noah as the center, the entire world was dyed in a pitch-black color. At this moment, all the magic shooters who were crying tears of joy and hugging each other froze in space and stopped moving. At this moment, Egnir and the rest of the dragons who were flapping their wings and flying in the air were also frozen in place. Frozen in place. That scene was as if time itself had stopped flowing, causing the entire world to be dyed in a pitch-black color. Noah was the only one who was still standing in the same spot as before. Clang! The holy sword and divine saber in Noah's hands blossomed with dazzling radiance, as if they had sensed something, and phosphorescent divine might energy circulated around them. However, Noah did not inject divine might energy into the two elven devices, nor did he waver in the slightest due to the changes in his surroundings. He only slowly turned his head, as if he had expected someone to do all this, and cast a sharp gaze forward. Then, a figure appeared. "You really didn't disappoint me. You really defeated that Econorolia." Jeffrey raised his head and met Noah's sharp gaze with a smile that did not give off any sense of danger. "That's an opponent that even I find a little troublesome. Even I can't kill him. Of course, Econorolia can't kill me either." "Is that so?" Noah said calmly. "So you think I can't kill you, so you came to me like this?" "No, it should be the opposite." The smile on Jeffrey's face became tired. "I came to ask you to kill me." Chapter 1732. I'm here to ask you to kill me. Noah fell silent when he heard those words from the fatigued Jerv. Noah's understanding of Jerv had already increased when he obtained the lumen starlight. In the past, Noah's understanding of Jerv had stopped at the level of the most vicious and evil dark mage in history. Apart from that, Noah didn't have any other impression of Jerv. It wasn't until Makarov entrusted him with the lumen starlight that Noah had a whole new understanding of Jerv. The man in front of him was just a pitiful person. He was a pitiful person who tried to die, and his abilities were so great that they involved the realm of God. In the end, He was cursed by God and obtained an immortal body. The curse that would take away the lives of the people around him the more he cherished his life was too cruel for a person. Noah felt that if he were in Jerv's shoes, he would definitely want to die. After all, instead of continuously taking the lives of the innocent people around him, and even the lives of those he cherished, it would be better to just die. Of course, Noah was much luckier than Jerv as he had a physique that would definitely not be cursed. Even God wouldn't be able to impose any curse on Noah, who had transcended the realm of humans and was doted on by thousands of worlds. Unfortunately, Jerv wasn't Noah, and wasn't doted on by the world. It would be better to say that Jerv was abandoned by the world because he was involved in the realm of God as a human, and could no longer integrate into this era. Some people said that ignorance was a sin. However, sometimes, it was also a sin if one's knowledge and talent were too outstanding. Jerv's existence proved that point. However, Noah definitely wouldn't choose to die like Jerv. Hence, Noah only had one kind of emotion towards Jerv. It wasn't sympathy, pity, sarcasm, or mockery. Instead, he was more or less angry. Under the control of his emotions, Noah's gaze on Jerv became sharper and sharper, and he abruptly asked this question. He suddenly asked, "It has been almost 400 years since you were called the most vicious and evil dark mage in history, right?" "Yes, I have indeed lived for 400 years, and belong to the same era as the dragons," Jerv answered honestly after being stunned for a moment. "So, I don't belong to this era, either. Just like Aconarolia, I should disappear with the change of era. Just because of this, you're going to borrow my hand?" Noah sneered. "Do you think I'll agree to that kind of thing?" "You're not going to agree?" Jerv frowned and asked in confusion. "Why? Don't you see me as an evil dark mage?" The crimes that he had committed up until now could be counted as innumerable, right? "You shouldn't mind killing me, right?" "I won't mind killing you," Noah said indifferently. "But, don't you think that's letting you off too easily?" "Letting me off too easily?" Jerv was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "You've said it yourself. You've committed countless sins so far. Not only did you leave behind forbidden spells like Systemar that cost lives, but you've also created many demons that directly and indirectly took away the future and happiness of so many people," Noah said word by word as he stared at Jerv. "You've committed so many sins and left behind so much evil, and now you want to die? How can it be that easy?" That was the biggest difference between Noah and Jerv. Death is a form of release, but at the same time, it's also a form of escape. Noah said without hesitation, "I won't kill you before you redeem yourself for all your sins." Jeffrey fell silent upon hearing this. After a long while, Jerv spoke with an expressionless face. "However, if you don't kill me, I will only commit more crimes. As long as I don't die, my existence will continuously rob the future and happiness of the people around me unless I forget the preciousness of life. However, in that situation, I will also rob the lives of others without hesitation as I view life as nothing more than grass. No matter what, my existence will only bring misfortune to others in any form." Jerv looked at Noah with dark emotions surging in his eyes. "Even so, you don't intend to kill me?" "No. If I let you live and allow you to commit even more sins, that would be putting the cart before the horse," Noah said calmly. "The question is whether your curse will take away the lives of others when you realize how precious life is, right?" As Noah said this, he raised his head and gazed at Jeff. A look that even Jeff couldn't understand appeared in his deep, dark eyes. Then, Noah picked up his pace and walked in Jerv's direction. Looking at Jerv approaching him step by step, Jerv's face was full of doubt, but he didn't show the slightest resistance. He just watched silently as Noah approached and stood in front of him. Noah looked into Jerv's eyes and said, "I won't let you take away the lives of innocent people, even if you're cursed by God." As soon as his voice fell, "Poochie!" With a tearing sound, the elf device named Demon Slayer penetrated Jerv's heart and came out from his back. Ha! Jerv didn't expect that Noah, who had claimed that he wouldn't kill him just a second ago, would suddenly attack him. His eyes slowly widened, and he looked at Noah with astonishment in his eyes. Under such circumstances, Jerv didn't notice it. The holy sword that penetrated his body didn't bring out a single drop of blood. Just like that, Jerv suddenly felt it. An unimaginable power appeared in his body without any reason, and he went berserk. A deep darkness surged from Jerv's body and turned into a gust of pitch-black wind that swept in all directions. Ah! Jerv felt as if something in his body was about to explode, causing him to scream in excruciating pain. The darkness that surged from Jerv's body like a swamp rolled wildly and shook the entire pitch-black space. Clang! At this moment, the demon slayer that pierced through Jeffrey's body emitted a dazzling white light. It surged out like a tide and covered the darkness that surged out from Jeffrey's body. Under the dazzling white light of the demon slayer, the thick darkness that surged out of Jeffrey's body started to dissipate bit by bit until it completely disappeared. Noah pulled out the holy sword, causing Jerv to tremble and kneel on the ground as he panted heavily. Geelf was sweating profusely as he panted heavily. He raised his trembling hands and exclaimed in disbelief. "The curse on me? I removed it," Noah said matter-of-factly. "My Aster has the ability to remove any curse, even if it's a god's curse." Noah's words made Jerv's expression change. There was surprise, doubt, confusion, and even disbelief in his expression. This way, you won't take the lives of others uncontrollably, and you won't have an immortal lifespan. Noah turned his back to Jerv. What you need to do next is to atone for the sins that you've committed in the past 400 years. With that, Noah glanced at Jerv. "As long as you live," Li Tianlon said. After saying that, Noah ignored Gerald and slowly walked in the direction of his companions. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.